Welcome back to MrNightfall, and hello to anyone joining for the first time. This video features ghost stories and haunted encounters, carefully told to help you relax and drift into sleep. If you enjoy tonight's stories, like, subscribe, and comment your location below. Get cozy, clear your mind, and let's begin. Story 1. I bought a house that came with a set of VHS tapes in the basement, and now I wish I was blind. I am writing this from a hotel room in Nevada. I have blocked the door with the dresser. I have unplugged the television. I have covered the mirrors. I can't be around reflections anymore. Every time I see my own face, I see static behind my eyes. I see the lines of track and distortion running down my skin. If you are a collector of vintage media or just someone who likes to browse estate sales for hidden gems, stop. Do not buy the unlabeled tapes. Do not buy the ones with handwritten dates. And for the love of God, if you find a tape labeled home movie, do not watch. Listen to the warning. Burn it, smash it, bury it. Just don't put it in the VCR. My name is Kevin. I was 32, a graphic designer who worked from home. I had just bought my first house, a fixer-upper in a quiet suburb of Ohio. It was cheap, built in the 70s, with shag carpet and wood paneling. The previous owner had died, an old man named Mr. Henderson who had no family. The house was sold as is, which meant it came full of his junk. I spent the first week cleaning out the basement. It was a finished basement, dark and smelling of mildew. In the corner, there was a heavy wooden cabinet. Inside, I found a collection of VHS tapes. There were hundreds of them. Most were labeled with innocuous things like Super Bowl 85, news broadcasts, sitcoms. I figured Henderson was a hoarder who taped everything off TV. But on the bottom shelf, pushed way to the back, was a shoebox taped shut with layers of duct tape. I cut it open. Inside were 6 tapes. They were black, generic cassettes with white labels. The labels were handwritten in shaky, jagged letters. Tape 1, the window. Tape 2, the door tape. 3, the hallway tape. 4, the bedroom tape. 5, the sleeper tape. 6, the waking. I was curious. Who wouldn't be? I assumed they were just creepy home movies or maybe some weird art project. I had an old VCR TV combo unit in the garage that I hadn't thrown out yet. I brought it down to the basement, plugged it in, and popped in tape 1, the window. The screen flickered with static. Blue screen. Then the image cut in. It was grainy, low-quality footage, handheld. It was shot at night. The camera was pointed at a window from the outside. I recognized the window immediately. It was the kitchen window of my house. The camera was steady. It just filmed the window. Inside, I could see Mr. Henderson sitting at the kitchen table eating soup. He looked younger, maybe in his 50s. He was oblivious. The tape ran for an hour. Just footage of a man eating, reading the paper, washing dishes. It was boring, but unsettling. Someone had been stalking him. I ejected it and put in tape 2, the door. This one was shot from inside the house. The camera was set up on a tripod in the living room facing the front door. It was night again. The lights were off. Nothing happened for 20 minutes. Then the mail slot on the door opened. A long, thin metal rod slid through. It wiggled around, feeling for the lock. It failed. The rod retracted. Then a face appeared in the mail slot. Just an eye. A wide, unblinking eye staring into the living room. It looked around, scanning. Then the tape cut to static. I was creeped out. I should have called the police then. But I told myself this was old footage, decades old. The stalker was probably dead or in jail. I put in tape 3, the hallway. This footage was different. It wasn't static. The camera was moving. It was being held by someone walking through the house. The camera moved silently down the hallway. It paused at photos on the wall. It paused at a mirror. In the mirror, I saw the cameraman, or rather, I saw what he was wearing. He was dressed in a full-body black spandex suit, like a morph suit, but thicker. No face, no skin showing, just a black silhouette. He waved at the mirror, a slow, mocking wave. Then he walked to the basement door. He opened it. He walked down the stairs, the same stairs I had just walked down. He walked to the corner of the basement, to the wooden cabinet. He opened the cabinet. He placed a shoebox inside. The tape ended. I froze. My skin crawled. The tapes I was watching, the stalker had put them there, for Henderson to find, or for me. I looked at the cabinet in the corner. It looked ominous now in the dim basement light. I grabbed tape 4, the bedroom. My hands were shaking. I had to know. I put it in. The footage was shot from inside a closet. The shuttered doors were cracked open just an inch. Through the slat, I could see a bed. Mr. Henderson was sleeping in the bed. The camera zoomed in on his face. He was snoring softly. Then the closet door opened. The camera moved out into the room. The figure in the black suit stood over the bed. He just stood there, towering over the sleeping old man. He reached out a gloved hand. He touched Henderson's face, gently, a stroke on the cheek. Henderson stirred, but didn't wake. The figure leaned down. The camera got close to the figure's face, the smooth black fabric where a face should be. And then a sound came from the TV speakers. Breathing. Heavy, wet breathing. But it wasn't coming from the tape. It sounded like it was behind me. I spun around. The basement was empty. "Just the acoustics," I whispered. "Just the echo." I turned back to the TV. The tape had ended. I picked up tape 5, the sleeper. I hesitated. I really didn't want to watch it, but I felt a compulsion, a pull, like gravity. I pushed the tape in. The screen was black. No image, just audio. It was a recording of someone sleeping, the rhythmic in-out of breath. Then a voice whispered over the breathing, "He doesn't know I'm here. He thinks he's alone. He thinks locks keep people out. But locks are just suggestions." The voice was distorted, deep, digital. "I live in the spaces he doesn't look. I live in the crawl space. I live in the attic. I live in the walls." Then the image cut in. It was footage of the attic. My attic. I recognized the insulation and the rafters. In the corner of the attic, there was a sleeping bag, a pile of candy wrappers, a bucket. Someone had been living up there. The camera panned to a hole in the floorboards. Through the hole, light was shining. The camera lowered to the hole. I could see down into the master bedroom, directly onto the bed. The tape cut to static. I ran upstairs. I grabbed a flashlight and a ladder. I went to the hallway ceiling hatch. I pushed it open. I shined a light into the attic. It was empty. Dust. Insulation. But in the corner, there was a flattened area in the insulation, like someone had been lying there recently, and there were candy wrappers, fresh ones, and a hole, a small hole drilled into the floor. I looked through it. I could see my own bed, my pillows. The realization hit me like a truck. These tapes weren't just old. Some of the footage, the candy wrappers, looked modern. I ran back to the basement. I grabbed the last tape. Tape 6. The wake-in. I had to see it. I had to know how it ended. I shoved it into the VCR. The screen flickered. It was a live feed. It wasn't a recording. It was showing the basement. It was showing me. The camera was positioned behind me in the corner of the room near the water heater. I turned around slowly. There was nothing there, just shadows. I looked back at the TV. On the screen I was turning around, but on the screen there was someone standing right behind me. The figure in the black suit. He was standing inches from my back. I spun around again, swinging my arms. "Who's there?" Empty air. I looked at the TV. On the screen, the figure was still there. He was mocking me, miming my movements. When I swung my arm, he ducked. When I yelled, he put a finger to where his lips should be. He pointed at the TV. I looked closer at the screen. The figure on the screen reached out. He reached toward the camera lens that was filming us. He grabbed the edges of the TV frame. And then the impossible happened. Hands, black, gloved hands, pushed out of the television screen. They were three-dimensional. They stretched the glass like it was liquid. They grasped the sides of the TV set. A head pushed through the glass. The smooth, black, faceless head. It was climbing out of the TV. I screamed and grabbed a heavy wooden cabinet. I shoved it over. It crashed into the TV stand. The TV shattered. Sparks flew. Smoke filled the room. The hands retracted. The figure vanished into the static of the broken tube. I ran. I grabbed my car keys and ran out of the house. I didn't lock the door. I didn't turn off the lights. I drove until I hit the state line. I stopped at this hotel. I thought I was safe. But an hour ago, I turned on the hotel TV to watch the news. The channel was fuzzy, static. Then the image cut in. It was footage of me, sleeping in the hotel bed. It must have been filmed 10 minutes ago when I dozed off. The camera angle was from the ceiling, and standing in the corner of the hotel room, barely visible in the shadows, was the figure in black. He waved. Then text appeared on the screen, white and jagged. Tape 7, the hotel. I unplugged the TV. I smashed it, but now I hear it. From the bathroom, click, whir, the sound of a VCR rewinding, but there is no VCR in the bathroom. I'm looking at the bathroom mirror from where I'm sitting. My reflection is in the mirror. I look terrified, but behind my reflection, the shower curtain is moving. A black hand is pulling it back and holding a camcorder, recording. I have to go. I have to find a place with no screens, no mirrors, no lenses. If you find a box of tapes, don't be curious. Curiosity is the lens they use to find you. And once they find you, you become the show. End of tape. The night grows deeper as we leave this story behind and move on to the next. I downloaded an app to record my sleep talking. It recorded a conversation between me and someone under my bed. I am a rational man. I work in logistics. I deal with spreadsheets, shipping containers, and hard data. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in demons. And I certainly didn't believe that my one-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a secure complex was anything other than a box of drywall and IKEA furniture. I started using the app, SleepSpeak, about 3 weeks ago. My girlfriend, Emily, had stayed over a few times and complained that I was mumbling in my sleep. She said it was creepy, that I sounded like I was arguing with someone. She broke up with me for unrelated reasons, or so she said, but the comment stuck. I wanted to know what I was saying. Was it stress? Suppressed anger? Apnea? The app is simple. It runs in the background. It uses a noise gate to ignore silence and the hum of the air conditioner, only recording when it detects distinct vocal frequencies. In the morning, it gives you a list of events with timestamps. Night 1 to 3 were uneventful. A few recordings of me snoring. One recording of me groaning and shifting the duvet. I felt silly for even using it. Night 4 was when it started. I woke up on Tuesday morning feeling drained, like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. I grabbed my phone and saw the notification. 4 new events detected. I clicked the first one. 2:03 a.m. Me, muffled. No, the red one. Just nonsense, dream gibberish. I clicked the second one. 3:15 a.m. Me, put it back. Still normal. I clicked the third one. 3:45 a.m. The waveform on the screen was different. Usually my voice showed up as a jagged blue block of sound. This recording had that, but intertwined with it was a second, much thinner, sharper red spike. I pressed play. Me, groggy. It's too tight. Silence for 3 seconds. Voice B, it has to be tight, or it won't fit. I dropped the phone on my duvet. My heart did a somersault in my chest. I sat there in the morning light, staring at the screen. The voice, it wasn't Emily. It wasn't a neighbor shouting through the wall. It was a whisper, a dry, rasping whisper. And the audio fidelity was terrifying. It sounded like the source was inches from the microphone. My phone charged on my nightstand right next to my head. I played it again. It has to be tight or it won't fit. The voice sounded genderless. It sounded like dead leaves skittering on pavement. I searched the apartment immediately. I checked the closets, the shower, the utility cupboard. Nothing. The windows were locked. The front door was dead bolted. I live alone. I told myself it was interference. Maybe the app picked up a radio frequency, a crossed line. I deleted the app. I went to work. But by the time I got home, the curiosity was eating me alive. I'm a data guy. Anomalies bother me. If it was interference, I could prove it. I re-downloaded the app. I also bought a standalone digital voice recorder, a high-end Sony model I used for meetings. I placed the phone on the nightstand and the Sony recorder on the floor, sliding it halfway under the bed. My bed is a heavy wooden frame that sits about 6 inches off the ground. Just enough space for dust bunnies and lost socks. Night 5. I didn't sleep well. I lay there listening to the settling of the building. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I woke up and went straight to the devices. The app showed 12 new events. The Sony recorder showed continuous audio, but marked spikes in decibels. I synced them up on my laptop. Event 1, 1:15 a.m. Me. Where are you going? Voice BR from under the bed. Just checking the seams. Go back to sleep, Caleb. I stopped the playback. I felt like I was going to throw up. It knew my name. The audio from the Sony recorder, the one on the floor, was clearer. The voice wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from above the recorder. It was coming from the underside of the mattress. I listened to the rest. It was a conversation, a long, mundane, terrifying conversation. 2:30 a.m. Me. Is it morning? Voice B. Not yet. 2 more hours. You need to rest the vessel. Me. Okay. 3:45 a.m. Me. It itches. Voice B. I know. The stretching is the hardest part. I'll apply more salve. Sound. A wet, slapping sound. Like raw meat being dropped on a counter. Slap. Slap. I stood up and backed away from the bed. I looked at the mattress. It was a standard memory foam mattress I'd bought online a year ago. I grabbed a pocket knife from my dresser. I stripped the sheets off. I flipped the mattress over. The underside was pristine. White fabric, no tears, no holes, no stains. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I pranking myself? Was I doing a ventriloquist act in my sleep? I decided to stay awake. Night 6. I drank 3 Red Bulls. I set up a camera on a tripod in the corner of the room, pointing at the bed. I sat in my gaming chair with the lights on, determined to catch this thing. 3 a.m. passed. 4 a.m. passed. Nothing happened. The room was silent. At 5 a.m., my eyes were burning. I blinked, just a long, slow blink. When I opened them, sunlight was streaming through the blinds. I panicked. I looked at the clock. 9:30 a.m. I had fallen asleep in the chair. I rushed to the camera. It was off. The battery was dead. That was impossible. I had plugged it into the wall AC adapter. I checked the outlet. The plug had been pulled. I checked the Sleep Speak app on my phone, which was still on the nightstand. 1 new event. Time, 5:02 a.m. 2 minutes after I closed my eyes. I pressed play. Voice B. He is trying to see us. Me. Voice sounded different, flatter. He is scared. Voice B. He should be. We are not ready for the transfer. The skin is still too tight around the shoulders. Me. I will eat more. Expand the surface area. Voice B. Good. Now, delete the video. I heard the sound of footsteps on the recording. My footsteps. That's the end of this story. Now we move on. I found a VHS tape labeled Last Night in This House and pressed play at midnight. The box was tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the master bedroom closet, a detail I only discovered because my cat, Miso, had been obsessively pawing at that particular spot for 3 days straight. I'd assumed she was chasing a mouse or reacting to some imperceptible draft. But when I finally pried up the warped oak plank with a butter knife, I found not a rodent nest, but a shallow cavity containing a single object, a VHS tape in a white plastic case, its label handwritten in faded blue ink. Last night in this house. Do not watch before midnight. I almost threw it away immediately. Who watches VHS tapes anymore? My apartment had no working VCR. I donated mine years ago when I finally embraced streaming services. But something about the specificity of the warning intrigued me. Do not watch before midnight. Not do not watch. Period. A conditional prohibition. An invitation disguised as a threat. I slipped the tape into my bag and spent the afternoon hunting through thrift stores until I found a dusty Panasonic player for $12. Its power cord frayed but intact, its tracking knob stiff with disuse. The apartment itself was a temporary solution, a one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian that had seen better days. I'd taken it on short notice after my landlord sold my previous building, and the rent was suspiciously low for the neighborhood. The realtor had been evasive about why the previous tenant left so abruptly. "Personal reasons," she'd said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But the place is spotless. You'll love it." She hadn't mentioned the faint smell of mildew that clung to the corners of the bedroom, or the way the floorboards groaned in a specific 3-note pattern whenever I walked from the kitchen to the living room, or the fact that the previous tenant had left behind a single item, a child's red hair ribbon tied neatly around the doorknob of the linen closet. I set up the VCR beneath my small television just after dinner, my movements casual, but my heart beating a little too fast. The tape felt heavier than it should have, dense, as if the plastic shell contained something more substantial than magnetic tape. I ran my thumb over the label again. Last night in this house. Whose house? This one. And whose last night? I checked the date on my phone. October 28th. Not a particularly ominous date, but close enough to Halloween that my rational mind could dismiss any unease as seasonal suggestibility. I decided to wait. Not out of fear, I told myself, but out of respect for the narrative. Midnight had been specified. Midnight it would be. The hours crawled by. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words blurred on the page. I made tea, washed dishes, scrolled through my phone without absorbing anything. At 11:45 p.m., I carried the tape to the living room and inserted it into the VCR. The high machine whirred to life with a sound I hadn't heard in a decade, the mechanical whine of spinning reels, the soft clunk of the tape being pulled into place. I pressed play, but immediately hit pause, the television screen filling with blue static. 11 minutes to go. At 11:59 p.m., I unpaused the tape. The screen flickered to life, not with the expected tracking lines or color bars, but with a perfectly stable image. A bedroom. My bedroom. The same water stain on the ceiling in the shape of a bird in flight. The same scuff mark on the baseboard near the closet door where I'd accidentally kicked it while moving furniture. The same window overlooking the fire escape where a lone oak tree stood silhouetted against a moonless sky. But the room was different, emptier. No rug on the floor, no posters on the walls, no cat bed in the corner. And in the center of the frame, sitting on the edge of a bare mattress, was a man. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair falling across, his forehead and a face etched with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He wore a gray sweatshirt and jeans, his hands resting on his knees, his shoulders slumped forward as if carrying an invisible weight. For a full minute, he simply sat there, staring at the camera mounted on the dresser opposite the bed. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear despite the analog hiss underlying the recording. "If you're watching this, you've moved into this apartment. You found the tape. And it's past midnight." He offered a thin, humorless smile. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I lived here for 11 months. This is my last night." He shifted slightly, his eyes never leaving the lens. "I need to tell you what happens here. Not to scare you, though God knows you'll be scared, but so you understand, so you don't make the same mistakes I did." He took a deep breath. "This building was constructed in 1897 as a boarding house for unmarried women working in the textile mills. In 1903, a fire broke out in the basement laundry room. 23 women died, most of them trapped on the 3rd floor, the very floor this apartment occupies. Their bodies were recovered, but something remained. Not ghosts in the traditional sense, not floating sheets or rattling chains, something hungrier. Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The fire didn't just kill them. It trapped them in the moment of their greatest terror, the smoke filling their lungs, the heat blistering their skin, the certainty that no one was coming to save them. And that terror, it learned how to feed. It discovered that fear has a taste, that panic has a texture, and the freshest, most potent fear comes from those who don't yet know they're about to die. He glanced toward the window, his expression tightening. It waits until midnight. Always midnight. That's when the veil is thinnest, the anniversary of the fire, you see. October 29th, 1903, 1:17 a.m. to be precise. But it starts its work at midnight. It shows you things, makes you see what it wants you to see. And if you react, if you scream, if you run, if you let the fear take hold, it gains strength. It gets closer. On screen, Daniel stood up slowly and walked to the window. He didn't look out. Instead, he pressed his palm flat against the glass. The first night I saw it, I thought I was dreaming. A woman is standing on the fire escape, her dress smoldering at the edges, her face a mask of soot and agony. She was mouthing words I couldn't hear. I woke up screaming, called the police. They found nothing, told me I'd had a nightmare. He turned back to the camera, his eyes glistening. The second night, she was inside the room, standing at the foot of the bed. Her skin was peeling away in blackened strips. She reached for me. I ran. Slept in my car for 3 nights after that. Daniel walked back to the bed and sat down again, his movements heavy with resignation. But you can't run forever. The fear follows you. It grows stronger each time you feed it. And eventually you realize the only way to survive is not to be afraid, to watch without reacting, to witness without participating. He looked directly into the lens, his gaze piercing through time and technology to meet mine. Tonight, I'm going to let it come. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to scream. I'm going to sit right here and watch what happens. And I'm recording it so you'll know. So when your time comes, and it will come because it always comes for the new tenant, you'll understand what you're facing. Daniel glanced at a digital clock on the nightstand. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes, he whispered. Then, to my horror, he reached forward and adjusted the camera, widening the frame to include not just the bed, but the entire room, the door, the window, the closet. He settled back onto the mattress, his posture unnaturally rigid, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His breathing was shallow, controlled. He was preparing himself, bracing. The clock on the nightstand ticked over to 11:59 p.m. And then, at exactly midnight, the temperature in my apartment dropped. I felt it before I saw it, a sudden, profound cold that had no business existing in a centrally heated building in late October. My breath fogged in front of the television screen. Goosebumps erupted across my arms, and on the tape, Daniel flinched, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes. He hadn't expected the cold to be so immediate. At 12:01 a.m., the first figure appeared, not on the fire escape, not at the foot of the bed, but reflected in the dark window behind Daniel, a woman in a high-collared dress, her hair arranged in an elaborate updo streaked with ash. Her face was turned toward the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream, her hands pressed against the pane from the outside. But there was no one on my fire escape. I'd checked before pressing play. The window behind me was empty, except for the reflection of my own terrified face. On screen, Daniel didn't turn. He kept his eyes fixed on the camera, his breathing steady despite the tremor in his lower lip. The woman in the window began to change, the fabric of her dress blackening, curling at the edges like burning paper. Smoke, faint but unmistakable, began to curl from her shoulders. Still, Daniel didn't move. At 12:07 a.m., the bedroom door creaked open, not on the tape, in my apartment. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The sound was unmistakable. The slow, deliberate groan of hinges I'd oiled just that afternoon. I hadn't locked the deadbolt. Stupid, careless. But I lived on the 3rd floor. No one could have entered without passing through the locked front door of the building. On screen, Daniel's door remained closed, but his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He could hear it too. Not in his room, in mine. The tape was bridging the decades, connecting his midnight to mine, his terror to mine. At 12:12 a.m., the second figure appeared on the tape. This one standing in the corner of Daniel's room, partially obscured by shadow. A younger woman, her arms wrapped around herself as if warding off cold, her nightgown stained with dark patches that might have been water or blood. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face. She wasn't looking at Daniel, she was looking at me, at the camera lens, at my eyes watching from 70 years in the future. And she was crying. Silent, desperate tears that carved clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. In my apartment, the smell hit me next. Smoke. Not the clean scent of a fireplace or candle, but the acrid stench of burning wool and hair, the chemical tang of old-fashioned fabric-catching flame. It grew stronger by the second, thick enough to coat the back of my throat, to make my eyes water. I wanted to run, to tear the tape from the VCR and flee into the hallway. But Daniel's warning echoed in my mind. If you react, if you scream, if you run, if you let the fear take hold, it gains strength. I stayed. I forced myself to breathe through my mouth, to keep my eyes on the screen, to witness without participating. At 12:15 a.m., Daniel began to change, not his expression, his body. The skin on his hands darkened, blistering as if exposed to intense heat. He didn't cry out, didn't flinch, but a low moan escaped his lips, a sound of pure agony he couldn't quite suppress. The blisters spread up his arms, his neck, his face. His sweatshirt began to smolder at the edges, tiny embers glowing in the fabric. He was burning alive on camera, and he was refusing to look away from the lens, refusing to give them the satisfaction of his fear. At 12:16 a.m., the third figure appeared on the tape. This one standing directly behind Daniel's chair, her hands resting on his shoulders. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and a face lined with kindness, even in death. She leaned close to Daniel's ear and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words through the tape's hiss, but I saw Daniel's response, his shoulders relaxing slightly, the tension in his jaw easing. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and then he looked directly into the camera and mouthed 3 words, "Don't be afraid." At 12:17 a.m., the exact moment the fire had reached the 3rd floor in 1903, Daniel Mercer burst into flame, not gradually, not with smoke preceding fire. One moment he was sitting on the edge of the bed, blistered but intact. The next, his entire body was engulfed in silent white-hot fire that consumed him in seconds. There was no screaming, no thrashing, just a man sitting calmly as his body turned to ash, his eyes remaining open and fixed on the camera until the very end. When the flames subsided, only a pile of gray ash remained on the mattress, and standing around that ash were 23 women, their forms no longer charred and agonized, but whole, peaceful, their faces clean, their dresses pristine, their hands clasped together as if in prayer. They looked at the camera one last time, not with malice, not with hunger, but with gratitude. Then they faded, leaving only the empty room and the pile of ash on the bed. The tape continued for 3 more minutes. Static. Then the sound of a key turning in a lock. Then nothing. At 12:20 a.m., the screen went black. In my apartment, the cold receded as suddenly as it had come. The smell of smoke vanished. The door stood closed. The room was silent, except for my ragged breathing and the soft whir of the VCR eating up the tail end of the tape. I didn't move for a full hour. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket I didn't remember fetching, staring at the black television screen. My mind raced through rational explanations. Carbon monoxide poisoning, sleep paralysis, mass hysteria triggered by suggestion. But the cold had been real. The smell had been real. The door had creaked open. I'd heard it with my own ears. At 1:30 a.m., I forced myself to stand. I ejected the tape with trembling hands and carried it to the kitchen sink. I was about to snap it in half when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Scratched into the plastic shell along the edge, nearly invisible unless caught by the light, a series of numbers. October 29th, 1903, and beneath them a single word, witness. I didn't destroy the tape. I couldn't. Instead, I placed it back in its case and hid it beneath the same loose floorboard where I'd found it. Then I went to bed, leaving every light in the apartment burning. I didn't sleep. I lay rigid beneath the covers, listening to the house settle around me, jumping at every creak and sigh. At 2:47 a.m., I heard it, a soft tapping at the window, not insistent, not threatening, just 3 gentle raps against the glass. I didn't move, didn't look. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my breathing slow and even, and after a full minute, the tapping stopped. The next morning, I called my landlord. I need to break my lease, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Effective immediately. There was a long pause. That's unusual, he said finally. Everything okay in the apartment? No issues with the plumbing or... Everything's fine, I interrupted. I just need to leave. Another pause. Longer this time. You found the tape, didn't you? The question hit me like a physical blow. How did you know about that? A sigh crackled through the phone line. Every tenant finds it eventually. Most throw it away without watching. A few watch it. And then they leave. His voice dropped, became almost gentle. Daniel Mercer was my uncle. He recorded that tape in 1993. He was the first one who figured it out, that they weren't trying to hurt anyone, they were trapped, and they needed a witness, someone to see them not as monsters, but as victims, someone to watch without fear. Did he survive? I asked, my throat tight. He walked out of that apartment at dawn, the landlord said softly. Unburned, unharmed. But he never slept through the night again. He said the fire was inside him now, not burning him, but keeping him company. He died last year, peacefully, in his sleep. I moved out 3 days later. I left most of my furniture behind. I couldn't bear to spend another night in that apartment, even with the lights on. But before I left, I did one thing. I placed a fresh VHS tape in a blank case on the kitchen counter. And on the label, in careful blue ink, I wrote, "First night in this house. Watch at midnight." Because I understand now what Daniel understood, what the women in the fire understood. Some prisons aren't made of walls or locks. They're made of being forgotten, of dying in terror and being remembered only as a cautionary tale. They needed a witness not to save them, but to see them, to truly see them as they were before the fire, as women with names and dreams and lives that mattered, and now sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows just right through the trees outside my new apartment, I smell smoke. Not the acrid stench of burning fabric, but a clean, sweet scent of wood smoke on a cold autumn evening. And I feel a presence, not menacing, not hungry, but watchful, grateful. The fire didn't take Daniel Mercer that night. It transformed him, made him a keeper of memories, a guardian of the threshold between fear and understanding. I never watch horror movies anymore. I don't need to. I lived one, but I don't regret pressing play at midnight, because in that hour between midnight and dawn, I learned the most important truth about ghosts. They aren't haunting us. We're haunting them by forgetting, by refusing to witness, by turning away from the pain we'd rather not see. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sit in the dark and watch, not with fear, but with compassion, not as a victim, but as a witness. The tape is still under that floorboard, waiting for the next tenant, the next witness, and when they find it, and they will, they'll have a choice to make at midnight, to run or to stay, to scream or to watch, to feed the fear or to set it free. I hope they choose wisely. I hope they understand that some doors shouldn't be opened, but some tapes need to be played, because the dead don't want to hurt us. They just want us to remember their names before the fire takes everything. As this story comes to rest, a new whisper begins. I found letters from a dead tenant, and now they want an answer. The rent was suspiciously cheap. That should have been my first warning. But when your bank account reads 3 figures, and the only alternative is your sister's couch, which already groans under the weight of her 2 toddlers and her patients, you learn to ignore red flags the size of bed sheets. The listing for the attic studio above Mrs. Gable's dusty antique shop on Elm Street promised charm, character, and quiet. It delivered the first 2 in spades. The quiet? That was the problem. It wasn't peaceful quiet. It was the thick, watchful silence of a held breath, the kind that presses on your eardrums until you hear your own pulse thudding in your skull. Moving in was a blur of boxes, sweat, and the pervasive smell of old wood, dust, and the faint, cloying sweetness of lavender that seeped up from the shop below. The studio itself was a long, narrow space under the eaves, with sloped ceilings that forced me to duck near the walls, and one small, grimy window overlooking the tangled alley behind the building. The previous tenant, the landlord Mr. Finch had mumbled offhandedly over the phone, had moved on suddenly. No forwarding address, just left the key under the mat. Finch, a man whose voice sounded like gravel in a tin can, hadn't even shown me the place. "Keys in the mailbox," he'd rasped. "First month's rent in cash. Slide it under my door." He sounded less like a landlord and more like a ghost, negotiating with another ghost. The first week was uneventful, just the unfamiliar creaks and groans of an old building settling, the distant chime of the antique shop doorbell, the muffled sounds of the city below. I buried myself in freelance graphic design work, trying to ignore the way the shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should be, the way the single overhead bulb flickered with a sickly yellow pulse if I stared at it too long. The quiet, however, began to fray at the edges of my concentration. It wasn't just absence of sound, it was an expectation. like the room itself was waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge its presence. I found the letters on a Tuesday. Rain lashed against the small attic window, turning the alley into a gray watercolor smear. I was reorganizing a rickety old wardrobe, the only storage besides a few shelves, to make space for my winter coats. Behind a stack of yellowed, moth-eaten sweaters that smelled faintly of camphor, my fingers brushed against something smooth and cool, not fabric, paper, bundled together with a faded blue ribbon, stiff with age. It was a stack of letters, dozens of them, all addressed to a single name in a looping, elegant script that felt both feminine and strangely urgent: Eleanor Vance. The return address on every envelope was identical: 7 Blackwood Lane, apartment 3BA. My blood ran a degree colder. 7 Blackwood Lane was the address of this very building. Apartment 3B was my studio. The letters weren't postmarked. They hadn't been sent through the mail. They'd been hidden, left behind. My rational mind screamed, "Private property, throw them out, don't snoop." But the silence of the room seemed to lean in, pressing on my temples. Curiosity, that old fatal flaw, won. I sat cross-legged on the worn rug, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the roof, and untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated October 12th, 1978. The paper was thin, fragile, the ink slightly blurred in places as if touched by damp fingers or tears. Dearest Eleanor, another night, another silence from you. The silence here is different now. It's not the quiet of an empty room. It's a listening quiet. The walls, they seem to hold their breath when I enter. The faucet in the sink drips a single drop at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every night I've tried tightening it. It doesn't help. I think it's counting. I found a hairpin today. Not mine. Silver with a tiny pearl. It was on the floorboards near the wardrobe, just like the one you lost last summer, remember? The one your mother gave you? I left it on the windowsill in case. Please, Ellie, if you're getting these, just write back. One word. Anything. I know you're angry. I know I shouldn't have, but I miss you so terribly. The silence is eating me alive. Yours, always. Thomas. My skin prickled. Thomas. The name felt heavy, loaded. I flipped to the next letter. October 18th. Ellie, the hairpin is gone. I checked the windowsill this morning. Vanished. But the dripping, it's faster now. 3:10 a.m. And there's a new sound, a scratching, inside the walls, like tiny fingernails, or maybe just mice. But it sounds deliberate, purposeful. I saw Mrs. Gable downstairs. She wouldn't meet my eyes, just clutched her rosary tighter and muttered about bad bones in the building. What does that mean? Do you know something, Ellie? Did you know what this place was before you left me here? I'm so tired. The silence isn't just in the room. It's in my head. It's shouting. Tale. The letters continued, a desperate, deteriorating chronicle over the next few weeks. Thomas wrote of cold spots that followed him, of the wardrobe door creaking open by itself in the dead of night, of finding his clothes neatly folded on the bed when he left them crumpled on the floor. He wrote of smelling lavender, Mrs. Gable's lavender, when the shop was closed. He wrote of seeing fleeting movements in his peripheral vision, of a woman's face, pale and sad, reflected for a split second in the dark window pane. He became convinced Eleanor was trying to communicate through the house itself, punishing him for some unnamed transgression. His handwriting grew increasingly frantic, the ink blotted and smeared. October 28th. 1978. She's here, Ellie, not you. Her. The one from the window. She stands in the corner by the wardrobe now. I can feel her cold breath on my neck when I sleep. She doesn't speak. She just watches, waits. And the letters. I found another one today, tucked into the pages of the book I left on the nightstand. Blank pages, just the envelope addressed to you. How? I think she wants me to write, to keep writing to you, to feed the silence with my words. But what if I stop? What if I burn these letters? October 30th, 1978. I can't sleep. The dripping is constant now. The scratching is inside the walls, inside my head. She stood over my bed last night. I felt her hand on my forehead, cold as marble. She whispered, "Write her." Her voice wasn't yours, Ellie. It was dry, like stones grinding in a deep well. I have to write. I have to answer. Maybe if I say I'm sorry enough, she'll let me go. Maybe if I tell you everything. The rest of the page was violently torn away, the ragged edge stained with something dark that wasn't ink. The final letter was undated. The paper was stiff, damp-stained, the handwriting a barely legible scrawl. The ink faded to a rusty brown. Eleanor, I know now. I know what you did. You left me here for her. You knew she hungers for voices, for words, for the sound of a living heart beating in her walls. You sacrificed me to keep her quiet, to keep her away from you. It's too late for sorry. The letters are her food. My words are her chains. She won't let me leave until I've written enough, until I've filled the silence with my misery, until it bursts. If you're reading this, if anyone is reading this, don't write back. Don't answer. She only wants a voice. Don't give her yours. Burn these. Burn them all before. The sentence ended in a long, jagged smear of that same rusty brown, as if the pen had been dragged violently across the page before being dropped. There was no signature, just the stain. I sat frozen on the rug, the rain forgotten. The silence in the attic studio wasn't just watchful anymore. It was hungry. Thomas Vance. He hadn't moved on. He'd vanished, died here, and his ghost, or the thing that had consumed him, was still here, trapped by his own unanswered letters. And I'd found them. I'd read them. I'd given the silence a voice again. The overhead bulb flickered violently, then died completely, plunging the room into gray twilight. The rain outside seemed to muffle, as if the world beyond the window had been wrapped in cotton wool. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, and a new sound, faint at first, a soft, rhythmic scratch, scratch, scratch from inside the wardrobe, like fingernails on wood, exactly as Thomas had described. My blood turned to ice. I scrambled back, knocking over the empty teacup I'd left on the rug. It shattered on the floorboards, the sound impossibly loud in the suffocating quiet. The scratching stopped. The silence slammed back down, heavier than before. Then a single fat drop of water hit the floor near my foot. Plink! From the ceiling, I looked up. The plaster was dry. Another drop fell. Plink! Then another. Plink! Forming a small dark puddle on the worn rug. Not water. It was thick, viscous, the same rusty brown as the stain on Thomas's final letter. From a corner by the wardrobe, the cold began. Not just cold air. A deep, bone-chilling cold that radiated outwards, frosting my breath in the dim light. And with it came the smell. Not lavender, not dust. The cloying sweetness of decay mixed with the metallic tang of old blood. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of waiting. A whisper dry and papery, like dead leaves skittering across stone, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke Thomas's final desperate warning, but twisted, layered with a wet, guttural undertone. Don't answer? But it wasn't a command. It was a challenge, an invitation. The next morning, I tried to be rational. I gathered the letters, intending to burn them in the small, rusted metal trash can I used for my sketch paper. I lit a match. The flame sputtered and died before it touched the paper. I tried again. Same thing. A third match snapped in my fingers. The letters felt unnaturally cold. I shoved them back into the wardrobe, deep behind the moth-eaten sweaters, my hands trembling. I told myself I was imagining things. Stress, sleep deprivation, the weight of the old building. That night, I woke at 3:10 a.m., not 3:17, 3:10. The dripping started. Plink, plink, plink. From the ceiling directly above my narrow bed, I lay rigid, eyes wide in the darkness, listening to the slow, deliberate drops of that dark fluid. The scratching began inside the wall beside my head. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Patient, insistent, waiting for a response. I lasted 3 days. 3 days of the dripping, the scratching, the bone-deep cold that followed me from room to room, the oppressive weight of the silence that seemed to press in tighter every time I opened my mouth to speak, only to find my words dying in my throat. The smell of decay clung to my clothes. Sleep was impossible. My work suffered. My hands shook constantly. The letters weren't just hidden, they were a beacon, and the thing in the walls had my name now. It knew I'd read them. It knew I understood. The breaking point came on the 4th night. I was sitting at my small desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, the cursor blinking accusingly. The silence was a physical pressure. The cold spot by the wardrobe had grown, filling half the room. The dripping was constant now, a slow, maddening rhythm from the ceiling. Plink, plink, plink. Then a new sound, a soft thump from inside the wardrobe, like something heavy being placed on the shelf. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I stood up, my legs weak, and walked slowly to the wardrobe. My hand shook as I grasped the tarnished brass knob. I pulled the door open. On the top shelf, placed with deliberate care on a folded yellowed handkerchief, was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, unlined, and a fountain pen. The same kind of pen, I realized with a fresh wave of terror, that Thomas had used. The pen was uncapped. A single drop of that same rusty brown ink hung precariously from its nib. My breath fogged in the freezing air. I didn't touch it. I just stared. The silence deepened, becoming a vacuum that sucked the air from my lungs. The whisper came, not dry this time, but wet, intimate, as if spoken directly into my ear. Right. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the only sound left in the world. The dripping, the scratching, the cold, all of it coalesced into that single, imperative word. Right. The pen seemed to pulse with a dark light. The blank paper was a void waiting to be filled. With what? An apology? A plea? Thomas's final warning screamed in my mind, "Don't answer. Don't give her yours." But the silence was so loud, the cold was so deep, the weight of Thomas's unanswered pain, trapped for nearly 50 years, pressed down on me. Maybe if I wrote, I could set him free. Maybe I could reason with it. Maybe I could be the voice that finally said the right thing, the words that would break the chain. My hand moved before my mind could stop it. I picked up the pen. It was ice cold, heavy, vibrating faintly with a deep subterranean hum. The ink on the nib smelled like copper and earth. I sat at my desk, the blank paper before me. The dripping stopped. The scratching stopped. The silence held its breath, waiting for my words. I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and rich. My own handwriting, usually neat and precise, seemed to twist and warp under its influence, becoming loopy, frantic, eerily reminiscent of Thomas's final scrawl. "I've found your letters." The words wrote themselves. I couldn't stop them. The pen moved with a will of its own, dragging my hand across the page. I read them all. I know about the dripping, the scratching, the cold. I know about her. I know you're trapped. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry she did this to you. Tears blurred my vision, hot against my cold cheeks. The pen kept moving, but I can't stay silent. The silence is killing me too. It's eating my thoughts, my sleep, my voice. Please, if you can hear me, tell me how to make it stop. Tell me what she wants. What do I need to say to set you both free? I signed it with my own name, my real name. The pen lifted from the paper. The silence shattered, not with sound, but with a wave of pure, ecstatic relief that washed over me, warm and suffocating. The cold vanished. The oppressive weight lifted. For a moment, the attic studio felt almost normal. Hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered in my chest. Had I done it? Had I broken the cycle? Then the pen moved again. Not in my hand. It floated up from the desk, hovering in the air before the paper. The nib dipped into the inkwell that hadn't been there a moment before. A small, ornate well that seemed carved from black stone. And it began to write, not in Thomas's hand, in a script that was sharp, angular, and chillingly precise. A woman's hand, Eleanor's hand. "Dear, my name, thank you for your kind words. It is so lovely to be heard again after all this time. Thomas was a foolish boy. He ran from his promises. He left me hungry. But you are different. You understand. You offer your voice willfully. That is a gift. She is pleased. She has waited so long for a new voice, one that is strong, one that can fill the silence for a very, very long time. Your letter is accepted. The answer is simple. Stay. Write to us again tomorrow night and every night after. Fill the pages with your fear, your regrets, your loneliness. She feasts on those most. We are waiting. Eleanor and she. The pen dropped onto the desk with a soft clatter. The black inkwell vanished. The dripping started again, not from the ceiling, from the letter itself. Thick, dark drops of that rusty fluid pooled on the cream paper, smudging the words, making them bleed and run like open wounds. Stay, stay, stay. The cold returned, colder than ever before. It wasn't just in the room. It was inside me, seeping into my bones, into the marrow of my fear. The whisper wasn't just in my ear anymore. It was in my head, in my blood. A chorus of two voices now, Thomas's desperate murmur and Eleanor's sharp, satisfied hiss, repeating the same words over and over. Stay, write, feed us. I tried to scream. No sound came out. My voice was already gone, claimed by the silence, promised to the thing in the walls. I looked at the wardrobe. It was open. Inside, on the floorboards where I'd found the letters, lay a fresh stack of cream-colored paper and a new bottle of that black, stone-carved inkwell, waiting. The scratching began again, not inside the wall, but inside my own skull, a constant, maddening rhythm. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of my own thoughts being unraveled, prepared to be written down. The dripping formed a puddle around my bare feet on the floor, cold, wet, final. I don't sleep anymore. I sit at the desk. The pen is always in my hand. The paper is always waiting. The silence is never empty. It's full of her, full of Thomas, full of Eleanor, full of the hungry ancient thing that wears their names like a shroud. They watch me from the corners, from the wardrobe, from the very grain of the wood in the floorboards. Their eyes are the dark spots on the ceiling. Their breath is the cold that never leaves. I write. I write about my terror, about the way the cold feels like worms burrowing under my skin, about the smell of decay that is now my own breath, about the dreams of Thomas, trapped in a room with walls made of his own unanswered letters, screaming silently as she peels the words from his soul. I write about Eleanor's cold satisfaction, her sharp eyes gleaming in the dark. I write about the landlord Finch, who knew, who left me here as an offering. I write about Mrs. Gable's lavender trying to mask the stench of the grave that rises from apartment 3B. They are never satisfied. The pages I fill vanish by morning, absorbed into the walls, feeding the silence, making it deeper, hungrier. I need more paper, more ink. My hands are stained brown. My eyes are sunken pits. The dripping is constant now, a small dark pool spreading across the floorboards around my chair. I drink it. It tastes like rust and regret. It keeps me awake. It keeps me writing. The pen moves. My hand is a puppet. The words flow. The silence grows. She is pleased. Thomas is quiet now. His hunger is sated by my voice. Eleanor watches, a ghost of a smile on her pale lips. And the thing that is neither of them, the ancient hunger in the bones of the house, stirs in its deep, dark place, content for now. But it will never be full. It will always need more words, more fear, more voice. I found the letters. I read them. I answered. And now I am the answer. My life, my breath, my very soul is the ink. The paper is the walls. The story is never finished. It only grows longer, darker, deeper into the silence. The rent is cheap for a reason. The attic studio doesn't need a tenant. It needs a scribe, a voice for the hungry dark. And I am writing. I am always writing. The scratching in the walls is just the sound of the house turning the pages, waiting for the next word, the next drop of blood ink, the next piece of my silence to devour. I can't stop. The pen won't let me. The silence demands its due. And I am so very tired, but the dripping hasn't stopped, and the cold hasn't lifted. So I write. I write until my fingers bleed onto the page, mixing with the ink. I write until my eyes blur. I write until the only sound left in the world is the scratch of the nib and the wet, satisfied sigh from the corner by the wardrobe. She is listening. She is waiting. And I am still here, still writing, still feeding the silence that will one day swallow me whole, leaving only these words behind, waiting for the next tenant to find them and answer. And that ends this story. A new one starts now. I inherited a house where the previous owner never actually left. The lawyer's letter arrived on a Tuesday. The envelope thick and cream-colored, bearing a return address from a firm I'd never heard of in a town I'd only visited once as a child. My great-uncle Alistair had died, the letter informed me, at the age of 89. He'd left no immediate family, no spouse, no children, and for reasons the lawyer couldn't or wouldn't fully explain, he'd named me, his sister's grandson, whom he'd met exactly twice in his life, as the sole beneficiary of his estate. The estate consisted of one asset, a 2-story clapboard house on 5 wooded acres 20 miles outside of Blackwater Falls, a town so small it barely warranted a dot on most maps. I should have refused it. I should have written back that I had no interest in a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere, that I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city and had no desire to become a property owner, especially not of some decaying rural homestead. But my mother's voice echoed in my head when I read the letter. Alistair was always odd, but he was kind to me when no one else was. Go see the place at least. For me. And beneath that, the quieter, more practical voice. The house was paid off. Property taxes in that county were negligible. It could be rented out, or sold, or used as a weekend retreat. It was, in purely financial terms, a gift I couldn't afford to refuse. I drove out on a Saturday morning in late October, the road narrowing from 4 lanes to 2 to a single winding ribbon of asphalt, hemmed in by skeletal oaks and maples still clinging to a few stubborn crimson leaves. The GPS lost signal 7 miles from town. I found the house by the faded green mailbox at the end of a gravel drive, its numbers 1734, so weathered they were nearly illegible. The house itself was smaller than I'd imagined, white paint peeling in long curls like sunburnt skin, a sagging porch wrapped around the front and one side, windows dark and watchful beneath a roof of moss-flecked shingles. It looked less abandoned than waiting. The lawyer had mailed me the key a week earlier, a heavy old-fashioned brass thing that fit smoothly into the lock despite the rust staining the knob. I turned it. The door swung inward without a sound, as if recently oiled. That should have been my first warning. An empty house, standing for weeks after its owner's death, shouldn't have a door that opened so easily. It should have stuck in the frame from humidity or groaned on stiff hinges. But it opened silently, revealing a dim interior that smelled not of dust and decay, but of lemon polish and wood smoke. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the stillness. Stupid, I knew. No one should be here. The lawyer had assured me the house had been empty since Alistair's body was discovered 3 weeks earlier by a neighbor who'd grown concerned when the morning paper remained on the step for 2 days running. But the smell of a recent habitation clung to the air, unsettling me. I stepped inside. The front room was a parlor frozen in the 1970s. Plaid sofa, wood-paneled walls, a television set with a curved screen and knobs instead of buttons. But everything was immaculate, not sterile, not staged for sale, but lived in clean. A book lay open on the side table, John le Carré's Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, a pair of reading glasses resting on the page as if their owner had just stepped away for a moment. A half-full glass of water sat beside it, condensation still beating the sides. I touched the glass. Cold, ice cold. My skin prickled. I backed toward the door, heart hammering. Someone had been here recently, perhaps was still here. I fumbled for my phone, no signal, of course, and considered running back to my car, but then rationality reasserted itself. The neighbor, the lawyer, someone maintaining the property until the estate settled, that was all. They'd been here this morning, perhaps, left the glass of water, stepped out when they heard my car on the gravel drive. I took a deep breath and continued my tour. The kitchen was equally pristine, counters wiped clean, dishes dry in the rack beside the sink, a cast-iron skillet hanging from a hook above the stove, still warm to the touch when I brushed against it. A single coffee mug sat in the sink, a faint brown ring staining the bottom. In the refrigerator, milk sat in its carton, a week past its expiration date, but still smelling fresh. Eggs, butter, a wedge of cheddar cheese wrapped in wax paper. Not the provisions of a man on his deathbed, the provisions of a man expecting to eat breakfast tomorrow. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms. The first, clearly Alistair's. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a dresser topped with a hairbrush still holding strands of fine white hair, a wallet lying open on the nightstand. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Driver's license photo. A gaunt man with watery blue eyes and a shock of white hair. Age 87 in the picture, though. He'd died at 89. $20 in cash. A library card. No family photos. I set it down carefully, feeling like a trespasser. The second bedroom had been kept as a guest room. Neatly made bed, empty closet, a layer of fine dust on the dresser that hadn't been disturbed in years. This room felt truly empty. The rest of the house did not. I spent 3 hours walking through those rooms, my unease growing with each passing minute. The house was a paradox, a place recently vacated, yet supposedly empty for weeks. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. It was as if Alistair had stepped out for a walk and would return at any moment to finish his book, drink his water, wash his coffee mug. I decided to stay the night. Not out of bravery, I was terrified, but out of a stubborn need to prove to myself that my fear was irrational. I brought a sleeping bag and a change of clothes, planning to camp on the living room floor. As dusk settled over the woods, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange, I built a fire in the stone hearth using kindling I found stacked neatly in a copper bucket beside the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows across the wood-paneled walls. That's when I noticed the photographs. I'd been too focused on the strangeness of the house's condition to really look at the decor. Now, in the firelight, the pictures on the walls emerged from the gloom. Dozens of them. Black and white, sepia, color fading to magenta. All of them featured the same man at different ages. Alistair as a boy with a cowlick and knobby knees, Alistair as a young man in military uniform, Alistair middle-aged, standing beside a car with tail fins, Alistair older, gaunter, standing on this very porch. But in every single photograph, he was alone. No parents, no siblings, no friends, no wife, just Alistair. Through the decades, growing progressively more isolated, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. The final photograph hung above the mantelpiece. Alistair, in his late 80s, standing in this room, wearing the same brown cardigan I'd seen folded neatly at the foot of his bed upstairs. He was looking directly at the camera, his expression impossible to read, not hostile, not welcoming, but watchful, patient, as if he knew someone would be standing where I now stood, looking up at him. I slept poorly that night. Every creak of the house settling sounded like a footstep. Every rustle of leaves against the window pane sounded like breathing. I woke repeatedly, convinced I heard the soft click of a door closing downstairs, the whisper of fabric moving through a room. Each time, I'd lie frozen in my sleeping bag, straining to hear over the thudding of my own heart. Each time, silence would return. By dawn, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed to breaking. I decided to leave after breakfast. I'd seen enough. I'd call the lawyer Monday and tell him to put the house on the market. I didn't care about the money. Some inheritances weren't worth the price. I was pouring water into the electric kettle I'd found in a cabinet when I saw it. On the kitchen table, beside the salt and pepper shakers, lay a single sheet of lined notepaper. I hadn't seen it yesterday. I was certain of it. I'd examined that table thoroughly, running my fingers over its scarred surface. There had been nothing on it but a ceramic bowl holding 3 unblemished apples. Now there was a note. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The handwriting was spidery but precise, the ink slightly faded as if written with an old ballpoint pen. The sugar is in the blue canister. The coffee is fresh. Help yourself. No signature, no date. Just those 11 words. I dropped the note as if burned. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I backed away from the table, my eyes scanning the room. The closed door to the basement, the narrow hallway leading to the back door, the staircase to the second floor. The house was silent, still, but I was no longer alone in it. I fled without making coffee, without eating the apples. I stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack with frantic, clumsy movements and practically ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my eyes fixed on the house's dark windows. As I reversed down the gravel drive, I didn't look back until I reached the main road. In the rearview mirror, the house stood silent and still against the morning light. But in the upstairs window, the guest room window that had been dusty and empty the day before, a pale face looked out, gaunt, frail, watching me go. I drove straight to the Blackwater Falls Sheriff's Department, a single-story brick building next to the post office. The deputy on duty, a heavy-set man named Rawlins with a kind face and tired eyes, listened patiently as I stammered out my story. The cold glass of water, the warm skillet, the note on the table, the face in the window. When I finished, he didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He just sighed, a long, weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Alistair Pembroke," he said, writing nothing down. "Found in his bed by old Mrs. Gable next door. Peaceful," the coroner said. "Heart just gave out in his sleep. Been alone out there 40 years since his sister passed. Before that, lived with his parents until they died. Before that, well, he was always alone, far as anyone can tell." "He's still there," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I'm not imagining things. Someone's in that house." Rawlins leaned forward, resting his elbows on the scarred wooden desk. "Son, the house has been locked since we removed the body. Mrs. Gable has the spare key. She checks on it every few days, makes sure pipes haven't frozen, that no kids have broken in. She's the only one besides the lawyer who's been inside since he died." "Then how do you explain the note?" I demanded, pulling the crumpled paper from my pocket and smoothing it on the desk between us. Rawlins picked it up, studied it for a long moment, then handed it back. "Alistair Pembroke wrote that," he said quietly. "I'd know his handwriting anywhere. He used to send notes to the station every Christmas. Season's greetings from Alistair Pembroke on that same lined paper. But he's been dead 3 weeks. Mrs. Gable," I said, "she must have written it as a joke, or to scare me off so she can get the house herself." Rawlins shook his head. "Edith Gable is 82 years old and walks with a cane. She couldn't drive the 5 miles to that house, let alone sneak in and out without you hearing her. and she wouldn't play a cruel joke like that. She liked Alistair, brought him soup when he was sick last winter. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze not unkind. "You know what I think?" he said finally. "I think Alistair Pembroke lived alone in that house for so long that the walls absorbed him, his routines, his habits, his presence. And now that he's gone, the house is still performing them. Like a record player that keeps spinning after the needle's been lifted, the note wasn't meant for you. It was just part of the pattern. The house making coffee for its owner, setting a place at the table, waiting for him to come home." I left the sheriff's department unsettled but slightly calmer. Rawlins' explanation was supernatural, yes, but not malicious. A haunted house wasn't necessarily a dangerous house. Perhaps this was just residual energy, a psychic echo of a lonely man's daily life. I could handle that. I could sell the property to someone who believed in that sort of thing, a paranormal investigator, a writer looking for inspiration. I returned to the house 3 days later, armed with a digital recorder, an EMF meter I'd borrowed from a friend who dabbled in ghost hunting, and a determination to document whatever was happening there. If I could prove it was haunted, I could sell it at a premium to the right buyer, turn my inheritance into opportunity. The house greeted me with the same lemon and wood smoke smell, the same impossible cleanliness. I set up my equipment in the living room, placed the recorder on the coffee table, and spoke clearly into it. October 28th, 3:17 p.m., day 1 of documentation. House appears undisturbed since my last visit. I spent the afternoon methodically searching every room, every closet, every cabinet. I found nothing out of place, no hidden passages, no secret rooms, no evidence of recent human occupation beyond what I'd already observed. At dusk, I built another fire and sat before it, recorder running, EMF meter resting on my knee. The needle remained steady at baseline. At exactly 8:03 p.m., the kitchen light clicked on. I froze. I hadn't touched the switch. I'd been sitting in the living room the entire time, the kitchen visible through the open archway. The light, a single bare bulb hanging from a cord in the center of the ceiling, glowed steadily, illuminating the empty room. I forced myself to stand, to walk slowly toward the kitchen archway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stopped at the threshold and looked in. The table was set for one. A plate, a fork, a knife, a napkin folded neatly beside the plate. And in the center of the table, a bowl of vegetable soup steamed gently, tendrils of vapor curling toward the ceiling. I didn't touch anything. I backed away slowly, returned to the living room, and gathered my equipment. I was leaving. Immediately. No documentation. No proof. Some things weren't meant to be recorded. As I reached for the front doorknob, a voice spoke from directly behind me. "Leaving so soon?" I spun around, a cry catching in my throat. He stood in the center of the room. Alistair Pembroke, gaunt and pale in his brown cardigan, just as he appeared in the photographs. Translucent in the firelight, his form shimmering slightly at the edges like heat haze on asphalt. But undeniably there, undeniably real. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice trembling. A sad smile touched his lips. "I'm as real as this house, as real as the routines that built it, as real as the loneliness that filled it." He gestured around the room. "I didn't mean to frighten you. The note, the soup. I was only trying to be a good host." "Why are you still here?" I asked, my fear giving way to a strange, aching pity. "Because I never left," he said simply. "Not really. You see, when you live alone for as long as I did, when every meal is eaten at this table, every book read in that chair, every thought within these walls, the boundary between self and structure begins to blur. The house doesn't just contain you, it becomes you. And when the body fails," he looked down at his translucent hands, "the rest remains, not as a ghost, not as a spirit, but as a habit, a pattern, the house continuing to perform the functions of its occupant." He drifted toward the window, his form passing through the arm of the sofa without disturbing the fabric. "I died in my sleep 3 weeks ago." My heart stopped. But the house didn't know. It woke at 6 a.m. as it always did. It brewed coffee. It set the table. It waited for me to come downstairs. And when I didn't, it kept waiting. It still waits. Every morning at 6, every evening at 8. The house making dinner for a man who will never eat again. Tears welled in my eyes, not from fear, but from the profound tragedy of it. A lifetime of solitude so complete that death itself couldn't break the patterns of living. "What do you want?" I asked softly. He turned to face me, his watery blue eyes holding mine. "I want you to stay, not forever, just for a little while. Long enough for the house to learn a new pattern, long enough for it to understand that someone else lives here now. Otherwise," he gestured to the walls around us, "otherwise it will keep setting one place at the table until the roof collapses and the walls rot away. A century from now, children will dare each other to spend the night here, and at 8:03 p.m., they'll hear a spoon clinking against a bowl that isn't there. This house will be haunted not by me, but by its own memory of me, and that would be a terrible loneliness." I stayed. Not that night. I couldn't. I drove back to my apartment in the city, my mind reeling. But I returned the next weekend, and the weekend after that. I began spending Fridays through Sundays at the house, slowly, deliberately establishing my own routines within its walls. I drank coffee from a different mug than the one I'd found in the sink. I read books from the town library rather than the ones on Alistair's shelves. I cooked my own meals, setting 2 places at the table even when eating alone. I spoke aloud as I moved through the rooms. "I'm going upstairs now. I'm making toast. I'll be back in an hour," giving the house a new voice to absorb. At first, Alistair's presence remained strong. I'd find his book still open on the side table each morning, though I closed it every night. The single place setting would appear at 8:03 p.m. sharp, though I'd cleared the table hours earlier. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. One evening, I came downstairs to find 2 bowls of soup steaming on the table. Another morning, I discovered my own book, The Overstory by Richard Powers, lying open on the sofa cushion where I'd left it, but with Alistair's reading glasses resting on the page. He never appeared to me again after that first conversation, but I felt him, felt his approval in the subtle shifts of the house's behavior. The thermostat adjusted itself to my preferred temperature. The radio in the kitchen, which I'd never touched, began playing classical music softly in the afternoons. The same station Alistair must have listened to for decades. Once, waking in the middle of the night, I found a quilt draped over me that hadn't been on the bed when I fell asleep. On my 8th weekend there, I woke at 5:58 a.m. to the sound of the percolator gurgling in the kitchen. I lay in bed listening, waiting for the usual sequence. The click of the stove igniting, the soft clink of a single mug being set on the counter. But this time, after the percolator finished its cycle, I heard 2 mugs being placed side by side, 2 spoons stirring, 2 chairs being pulled out from the table. I got up and walked downstairs. The kitchen was empty, of course, but on the table sat 2 steaming mugs of coffee, 2 plates with toast, 2 sets of silverware, and between them, folded neatly on a 3rd plate, was a note in that same spidery handwriting. "Thank you for the company. It's been a long time." I sat down and drank the coffee. It was perfect. Black, no sugar, exactly how I liked it. How I'd been making it every morning for weeks. The house had learned. I live in the house full time now. I quit my job in the city and found freelance work that lets me stay here. I've repainted the living room a soft sage green. I've planted a garden in the backyard. I've filled the empty guest room with my own books and photographs. The house is mine now, but it's not empty. Some nights, when the wind blows just right through the oaks outside my window, I hear it. Not a voice, not a footstep, but the soft, rhythmic sound of someone turning the pages of a book in the room below. And on winter evenings, when I build a fire, I sometimes catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a gaunt figure in a brown cardigan settling into the armchair opposite mine, warming his hands before the flames. I never look directly at him. I don't need to. I simply pour 2 cups of tea and set one on the small table beside his chair. The previous owner never left, but he's not haunting this house anymore. He's keeping it company. And after 40 years of solitude, I think that's exactly what he needed. What we both needed. Some inheritances aren't houses or land or money. Some are simply the gift of not being alone. And in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the fire has burned to embers and the wind has stilled, I sometimes think I hear 2 heartbeats in this house instead of 1. Slow, steady, finally at peace. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next. I rented a cheap room in an abandoned house at the edge of town. I found the listing at 2 a.m, when everything feels reasonable and nothing feels permanent. The photos were grainy, the description short. Room for rent. Quiet. Cash preferred. The price was less than half of anything else I'd seen. The address was at the far edge of town, where the streetlights thin out and the sidewalks crack and then simply stop. I told myself the cheap rent explained everything. I told myself the pictures looked empty because the owner valued privacy. I told myself I needed a place to sleep, not a place to live. When I drove out there the next afternoon, the sky was low and gray, the kind that presses down on you like a held breath. The house sat back from the road, half hidden by trees that had grown wild and unchecked. It wasn't burned or collapsed. It wasn't obviously ruined. It was just tired. The paint had peeled in long strips, exposing older colors beneath, like layers of old skin. The windows were intact, but dark, as if the light inside had been turned off a long time ago and forgotten. A man answered the door after I knocked twice. He was thin, older than I'd expected, with a face that looked carved instead of aged. He didn't give me his name. He didn't ask for mine. He took the cash, counted it carefully, and handed me a key that felt warm, as if it had been in his pocket for a long time. "Room's upstairs," he said. "Second door on the left. Don't use the back hallway." I asked why. He looked past me down the road and said, "It doesn't go where you think." That should have been the moment I left. Instead, I nodded like I understood, like it was a joke, like everything was normal. Inside, the house smelled of dust and something faintly sweet, like old flowers pressed between the pages. The floors creaked under my shoes, not sharply, but with a long, tired groan, as if the house needed time to acknowledge each step. The air was cool, despite the broken thermostat on the wall. No pictures hung anywhere, no mirrors. The walls were bare, marked only by faint outlines where something had once been and then removed. My room was exactly what the listing promised. A bed, a dresser, a single lamp. The window faced the trees, their branches close enough to brush the glass when the wind picked up. The door locked, the walls were thin. That first night, I slept hard. The kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion and relief. I didn't dream. I didn't move. I woke up in the dark with the sense that something had changed. It took me a few seconds to realize what it was. The house was breathing, not like pipes knocking or wood settling. This was slower, a deep, rhythmic sound rising and falling as if the structure itself had lungs. I lay still, listening. With each breath, the air in my room seemed to shift just slightly, like a tide pulling back and forth. I told myself it was the wind. The trees were close. Old houses make noises. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were soft, careful, bare feet by the sound of it. Someone walking slowly, stopping every few steps, then continuing. The steps reached my door and paused. I held my breath. The handle didn't move. Whoever it was stood there for a long moment, close enough that I could hear a faint, wet sound, like someone breathing through their mouth. Then the footsteps moved on, down the hall, toward the stairs. In the morning, the house was quiet and ordinary again. The breathing was gone. The air smelled like dust and nothing else. I told myself I'd imagined it. I went to work. I came back that evening with groceries and a determination not to let my nerves get the better of me. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, there were more of them. They didn't move like people going somewhere. They wandered. They doubled back. Sometimes they stopped outside my door. Sometimes they gathered near the top of the stairs, a cluster of soft sounds overlapping and separating again. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard whispering, not words, just breath shaped into something that almost meant something. A chorus of near sounds, like a language spoken underwater. On the third night, I started hearing it during the day. A faint scratching behind the walls, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. It followed me from room to room. When I stood still, it stopped. When I moved, it resumed, keeping pace. I tried to find the landlord. His room at the end of the hall was locked. I knocked. No answer. I listened at the door and heard nothing at all, not even breathing. That night, I dreamed I was standing in the back hallway. In the dream, the hallway was longer than it should have been. The walls bowed inward, the ceiling low enough that I had to duck. Doors lined both sides, each one slightly ajar, each one breathing softly. I walked past them, drawn forward by something I couldn't see. At the end of the hallway was a door without a handle. I woke up standing in my room, my hand pressed flat against the wall, right where the scratching usually came from. The wall was warm. I pulled my hand away and stared at my palm. For a second, I could swear there was a faint pattern there, like the impression of veins that weren't mine. I stopped sleeping after that. When you don't sleep, everything stretches. Time becomes thick and sticky. Sounds get louder. Shadows feel heavier. The house took advantage of that. It started doing things when I was tired enough to doubt myself. Doors I locked would be open in the morning. Objects would be moved just slightly, never enough to be obvious, but enough that I noticed. The dresser drawer would be pulled out an inch. The lamp would be turned to face the wall. The breathing came back, stronger now. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, a slow inhalation that made the walls flex, followed by an exhale that rattled. The windows. One night, the footsteps didn't stop at my door. The handle turned slowly, carefully, as if whoever was on the other side knew exactly how much pressure to use. I watched it move, inch by inch, until the latch clicked. The door opened just a crack. I couldn't see anything in the hallway. The darkness there was deeper than the darkness in my room, a solid thing that swallowed the light. From within, it came the smell I'd noticed on my first day, stronger now. Old flowers, rot. Something lived in and wrong. A hand slid through the gap. It was pale, almost translucent. The skin stretched thin over bones that looked too long. The fingers bent the wrong way at the joints, curling inward like hooks. It rested on the doorframe, and I felt a pressure in my chest, as if something was leaning on me from the inside. Then a voice spoke from the hallway. It sounded like mine. It said my name the way I say it when I'm alone, quietly, just to hear it. I don't remember screaming. I remember the door slamming shut. I remember the lock turning. I remember sitting on the bed until morning, my back against the wall, my eyes burning. The next day, I packed my things. As I carried my bags down the stairs, I noticed something I hadn't before. The walls were marked with faint handprints, overlapping and smeared, all at about chest height. They led toward the back hallway. I stood at the entrance to it for a long time. The air there was colder. The breathing was loudest here, a deep, satisfied rhythm. The hallway was dark, but not empty. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to understand. I left without saying goodbye. I didn't get far. Halfway down the driveway, I realized I was still holding the key. It was warm in my hand, warmer than it should have been. Without thinking, I turned around to throw it back. The house was closer than it had been before. The trees leaned inward, their branches interlaced above the roof like fingers locking together. The windows were no longer dark. They glowed faintly, each one pulsing in time with the breathing. The front door was open. I woke up in my room. My bags were unpacked, my clothes folded neatly in the dresser. The door was locked. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps moving toward me, confident now, unafraid. I understood then. The room wasn't for rent. It was a mouth, and I had finally stopped pretending I didn't know what it was hungry for. That's where this tale ends. Now, another waits just beyond the shadows. I rented a room from Craigslist that has no photos. $350 a month. In this economy, in this city, that number doesn't imply a bargain. It implies a crime scene. I knew that. I wasn't naive. But when you're 3 months behind on student loans and your freelance graphic design gig has dried up into a desert of unanswered emails, You stop looking for red flags and start looking for a roof. The listing on Craigslist had no photos, just text, room for let, large historic home, East 4th Street, quiet, cash only. I met the landlord, Mr. Giles, on a Tuesday evening. It was raining, that heavy, cold November rain that smells like rusted metal and wet asphalt. The house was a looming Victorian thing, painted a peeling, sickly yellow that looked like bruised skin under the streetlights. It sat on a corner lot, overgrown with ivy that had choked the life out of the porch railings. Giles was a small man, nervous, smelling of mothballs and peppermint schnapps. He didn't look me in the eye. He handed me the keys after counting my cash with shaking fingers. "You're the only one here right now," he mumbled, looking at the dark windows of the second floor. "Other tenant left. Quickly. Keeps to himself mostly anyway. It's quiet. You'll like the quiet." I didn't ask why the other tenant left. I just wanted the key. My room was on the first floor at the back of the hallway, past the grand staircase that groaned even when you just looked at it. The room was big, I'll give it that. High ceilings, crown molding that was thick with decades of painted-over dust, and a single, large window that looked out onto a backyard that was essentially a mud pit filled with brambles. I moved in that night. I had 2 suitcases, a sleeping bag, a laptop, and a box of ramen. I set up my office on a card table I found in the closet. The closet was weirdly deep, smelling of cedar and something sweeter, like rotting apples. I closed the door and pushed the table against the opposite wall. The first 3 nights were fine. It was just the adjustment period. Old houses make noise. They settle. Wood contracts in the cold. Pipes hammer when the heat kicks on. I told myself this every time the floorboards above my head creaked. Just the house settling. But the settling had a rhythm. It started on the 4th night. I was working late, trying to salvage a logo design for a client who hated everything I did. It was 2:00 a.m. The silence in the house was heavy, the kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears. Thump. It came from directly above me, a soft, dull impact, like a bag of wet sand dropped on the floor. I froze, my hand hovering over the mouse. I waited. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Something was being dragged. It was slow, agonizingly slow. It sounded like fabric moving over rough wood. It moved from the center of the room above to the corner. Then it stopped. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid immediately. "Is someone up there?" Silence. I assumed it was the other tenant Giles had mentioned, though I hadn't seen a single sign of life. No mail in the hallway, no boots by the door, no lights in the upstairs windows when I came home. I put my headphones on, turned up the white noise playlist, and went to sleep. The next day, I went upstairs. I told myself I just wanted to introduce myself, to ask them to keep it down at night. The staircase was freezing. The air got colder with every step. At the top of the landing, there were 3 doors. 2 were open, revealing empty bedrooms with bare mattresses and dust motes dancing in the gray afternoon light. The 3rd door, directly above my room, was closed. I knocked. The wood felt damp, sticky. "Hello? Neighbor?" No answer. I knocked harder. The door rattled in its frame. It was locked. Not just locked, but jammed. I tried the handle and it didn't give a millimeter. I put my ear to the wood. I heard breathing. It wasn't normal breathing. It was wet, rattling. A slow, labored intake of air followed by a gurgling exhale. It sounded like someone with pneumonia or someone drowning very, very slowly. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. The breathing stopped instantly. I backed away. "Okay, sorry to bother you." I retreated to my room and locked the door. I called Giles. It went straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Hey, I think the guy upstairs is sick. He sounds bad." Giles never replied. A week passed. The noises changed. The thumping stopped, replaced by pacing, relentless pacing. It would start at midnight and go until 4 in the morning. Creak, step, creak, step. It was a heavy, limping gait. One foot would land solid, the other would drag. I stopped sleeping. I started drinking too much coffee. My work suffered. I found myself staring at the ceiling, tracing the water stains that looked like maps of countries that didn't exist. One particularly bad stain was right above my bed. It was dark brown, almost black in the center. I noticed it was getting bigger. On a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after moving in, the smell started. It wasn't a garbage smell. It was meaty. It smelled like raw copper and spoiled pork. It permeated everything, my clothes, my sheets, my hair. I bought air fresheners, candles, incense. Nothing touched it. It was coming from the ceiling. I went to the hardware store and bought a step ladder. I needed to see if a pipe had burst or if an animal had died in the crawl space between the floors. I set the ladder up under the dark stain. I poked it with the handle of a broom. The plaster was soft, spongy, drip. A single drop of dark, viscous fluid landed on my cheek. I wiped it off, panicked, scrubbing my face with my shirt. It was red, not bright red, but dark, maroon blood, old blood. I scrambled down the ladder and ran to the bathroom to wash my face. I scrubbed until my skin was raw. When I came back out, I looked up at the ceiling. The stain was pulsing. I swear to God it was expanding and contracting like a slow heartbeat. I should have left then. I should have packed my bags and slept under a bridge. But I was broke. I had $40 to my name until the next invoice cleared. I had nowhere to go. Logic is a dangerous thing when you're desperate. I rationalized it. It's a dead raccoon, I told myself. Fluids leak. Gravity pulls them down. It's disgusting, but it's physics, not ghosts. I taped a garbage bag over the ceiling stain to catch the drips and moved my bed to the other side of the room. That night, the house woke me up. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in pressure. My ears popped. I sat up, heart hammering against my ribs. The room was pitch black. The street lamp outside had burned out. I heard a sound from the corner of the room, the closet. The door, which I always kept latched shut because of the smell, was clicking. The latch was lifting. Click. The door creaked open about an inch. I held my breath. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to use the flashlight, but my hand knocked it off. It hit the floor with a loud clatter. From the closet, a voice whispered. It was my voice. "Who's there?" the closet whispered. It was a perfect recording of me asking that question the first night. The same inflection, the same tremor. I couldn't breathe. My throat seized up. "Is someone up there?" the closet voice asked, my voice again. Then a low, wet giggle, a sound I had never made. I lunged for the lamp switch. The bulb flashed once and blew out with a pop. Darkness again. "Giles," the voice said, but it wasn't my voice anymore. It was the landlord's. Tenant left quickly. I scrambled out of bed, tangled in the sheets, and fell hard onto the floor. I crawled toward the hallway door. The closet door slammed open. It hit the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. I didn't look back. I got the hallway door open and sprinted. I didn't grab my laptop. I didn't grab my shoes. I ran out in my boxers and t-shirt, barefoot onto the cold, splintery floor of the hallway. I made it to the front door, locked. I fumbled with the deadbolt. My fingers were slippery with sweat. From the top of the stairs behind me, the breathing started. That wet pneumonia rattle, it was loud. Whatever was making it wasn't behind a door anymore. It was on the landing. I got the bolt violently thrown back and ripped the door open. I burst out onto the porch, gasped by cold night air. I ran down East 4th Street until my feet were bleeding and my lungs burned. I ran until I saw the fluorescent lights of a 24-hour gas station. I collapsed inside, crying, shaking so hard the attendant called the police. I told him someone had broken in. I didn't tell them about the voice. I didn't tell them about the blood. They wouldn't believe me. The police went to the house. They called me an hour later. "Mr. Evans," the officer said, sounding annoyed, "we checked the place. It's secure. No sign of entry, but we need you to come down here." "I'm not going back there," I said. "Sir, you need to explain what's in the upstairs room." "I don't know," I sobbed. "I've never been in there. The door was locked." "The door wasn't locked," the officer said. "And there's no floor in that room, sir. It's just open joists. Looks like it's been that way for years. But we found your things." "My things are downstairs," I said. "No," the officer said, his voice dropping an octave. "We found your laptop, your clothes, and your sleeping bag. They were arranged in the center of the upstairs room on top of some plywood planks, laid out like a little nest." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I never put them there. And, sir," the officer hesitated, "Mr. Giles, we looked him up to contact the owner. David Giles died 3 years ago. The house has been in foreclosure. It's been abandoned since 2021. I hung up. I slept in a shelter that night. I borrowed money from my estranged sister the next day and got a bus ticket out of state. I left everything, my computer, my clothes, my identity. But sometimes, when I'm in a quiet room or when I'm staying in a cheap motel and the ventilation turns off, I can still hear it. Not the breathing. I hear the recording. I hear me, whispering from the walls. "You'll like the quiet," it says. "You'll like the quiet." This story ends here. It's time to move on to the next. I rented an apartment where no one stays longer than one night. The listing was absurd. A one-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city, walking distance to everything, with high ceilings and hardwood floors, available immediately for $450 a month. In this market, it had to be a scam or a trap. But my savings were evaporating faster than morning fog after the hospital job fell through, and my old place had been condemned after the fire. Desperation has a way of sanding down good sense. I clicked reply. The landlord, Mr. Eris Thorne, didn't ask for references, didn't run a credit check. He met me in front of 17B Elmwood Court, a crumbling brick building sandwiched between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop with barred windows. Thorne was a gaunt man in a threadbare suit that might have been dark blue once. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with an enormous tarnished key ring. His eyes darted everywhere but mine. "Lease is month to month," He rasped, the words dry as dead leaves. Cash only, no deposit, no utilities included. You pay the meter yourself. He slid a single sheet of paper across the hood of his rusted sedan. The terms were sparse, the blanks for my name and signature glaringly empty. Just sign here, today's rent, and you can move right in. He avoided the building's entrance, gesturing vaguely towards the door with his chin. Apartment 3B, top floor, back stairs. He practically shoved the key, a heavy, old-fashioned skeleton key with a worn brass head, into my palm. It was ice cold. "Welcome home," he muttered, already retreating to his car before I could ask why the rent was impossibly low. As he drove off, I saw him cross himself in the rearview mirror. The building smelled of damp plaster, stale cigarette smoke, and something else. A faint, sweetish odor, like overripe peaches left in a closed cupboard. The lobby was dim, lit by a single bare bulb dangling from a frayed wire. Post boxes lined one wall, most hanging open and empty. The back stairs were narrower than the front, carpeted in a threadbare, once-red runner that smelled faintly of mildew. The third-floor hallway was darker still. Only 2 apartments up here. 3A's door was covered in thick, yellowed newspaper taped over the peephole and cracks around the frame. 3B, mine, looked untouched. The lock was stiff, the door groaning open to reveal a surprisingly spacious room. High ceilings, yes. Original hardwood floors, scuffed but solid. A large window overlooking the tangled, overgrown courtyard. The kitchenette was cramped but functional. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub. It was dusty, neglected, but fundamentally sound, and so cheap. Relief washed over me, momentarily drowning out the building's unsettling smell. I'd found a lifeline. I hauled my few boxes up the back stairs as dusk fell. The streetlights outside cast long, distorted shadows through the grimy window. I swept and mopped, aired out the stale air, made the narrow bed in the corner. It felt good to be settled, safe. As I unpacked my meager kitchenware, I noticed something odd. The single overhead light in the main room flickered erratically. Not a bulb issue. I'd replaced it with a new one I'd brought. It pulsed, dimming and brightening like a slow, tired heartbeat. I tapped the fixture. It steadied. Probably just old wiring. The first disturbance came around 11:30 p.m. I was reading in bed, the only light coming from my small desk lamp. A sound from the kitchen, a soft clink, like a spoon tapping against a glass. I froze, listened. Silence. Probably just the building settling, old pipes. I dismissed it, turning a page. Then a low thump from the bathroom. Not a drip. A deliberate, heavy sound, like something being set down on the porcelain sink. My skin prickled. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded thin and ridiculous in the stillness. No answer. Just the oppressive quiet of the old building. I grabbed my phone, flashlight, app on, and crept into the kitchen. Nothing out of place. The sink was dry. The bathroom door was closed. I pushed it open. The small room was empty. The old mirror above the sink was fogged, as if someone had just taken a hot shower, but the air was cool. I wiped the mirror with my sleeve. Staring back at me wasn't my own wide-eyed reflection. For a fraction of a second, I saw a woman's face, a pale oval, dark circles under the eyes, lips parted in a silent gasp. Then it vanished, leaving only my own startled face and the words, "Get out," smeared in the condensation where her mouth had been. I slammed the bathroom door shut, leaning against it, heart hammering. Hallucination, stress, lack of sleep. I repeated the words like a mantra. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, back against the wall, phone clutched like a talisman, the desk lamp blazing. The flickering overhead light had gone dark. Around 2:17 a.m., the exact time my phone glowed, the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in the sharp artificial light. The sweet, cloying smell of overripe peaches filled the air, thick and nauseating. From the hallway outside my door came a slow, deliberate, dragging sound. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud, like something heavy being pulled down the hall. It stopped right outside my door. Silence. Then a soft, wet tap, tap, tap on the wood. Not a knock, a fingernail. I held my breath. The tapping stopped. The dragging sound started again, moving away towards the stairs. I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but on the worn carpet directly opposite my door, a trail of dark, wet footprints led away, fading after a few steps. Dawn brought weak, gray light and a fragile sense of safety. I called Mr. Thorne. It went straight to voicemail. I left 3 increasingly frantic messages. No reply. I needed coffee. I needed air. I locked the apartment, taking the heavy brass key with me, and headed down the back stairs. On the 2nd floor. Landing, I almost tripped over a small discarded object. A child's hair ribbon, faded blue satin, slightly damp. I picked it up. It smelled faintly of that same sickly, sweet peach odor. I dropped it like it was hot. Downstairs, the lobby was empty. I went next door to the pawn shop, buzzing with nervous energy. The owner, a burly man with tattooed knuckles named Sal, wiped his counter with a rag that looked dirtier than what he was cleaning. "Elmwood Court?" he snorted when I asked about the building. "That place? Yeah, I know it. Bad bones." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Landlord Thorne? Poor bastard's terrified of his own building. Won't set foot above the 2nd floor. Says the top floor. It's got a taste." He tapped the side of his nose. "Apartment 3B? Honey, nobody stays in 3B. Not one night. Ever. They check in, they check out before sunrise. Sometimes they don't even take their suitcases. Just run." He saw my face. "You just move in last night? Jesus, get out. Now, while it's still light, don't wait for dark. That thing, it doesn't like being alone. It gets hungry after dark." My blood ran cold. The hair ribbon, the footprints, the face in the mirror. It wasn't stress. It was real. I ran back to 3B, fumbling the key into the lock. I had to pack, get out. Sal's words echoed, "It gets hungry after dark." I threw clothes into my duffel bag, my hands shaking. As I pulled a sweater from the closet, something fluttered to the floor. A piece of notepaper, yellowed and brittle. In a spidery, frantic hand it read, "It wants to be seen. It hates the dark. Don't let it trap you in the dark. The key is the only way." Below that, scribbled over and over like a desperate chant, "Don't sleep, don't sleep, don't sleep." The overhead light flickered violently, once, twice, then died completely, plunging her room into gloom. The sweet peach smell surged, thick enough to choke on. From the bathroom, the dripping started. Plink, plink, plink. But the faucet was off. I knew it was off. The dripping grew louder, faster, echoing unnaturally in the small space. Plink, 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 plink. And beneath it, a wet, gurgling sigh like water draining from a clogged sink. I backed towards the door, my duffel bag forgotten on the bed. The doorknob was freezing cold under my hand. I turned it. It wouldn't budge. Locked from the outside? Impossible. I'd just unlocked it. I rattled the handle. Nothing. The dripping stopped. The sighing stopped. Absolute silence. Then a soft click from the bathroom door. It swung slowly open. Darkness yawned beyond the threshold, but not empty darkness. A shape stood there, backlit by the weak gray light from the bathroom window, tall, too tall for the low-ceilinged room. Its limbs seemed elongated, jointed wrong. It didn't have a distinct head, just a smooth, featureless oval that caught the faint light like wet stone. In one long, thin hand, it held something dark and wet that dripped steadily onto the floorboards. Plink. The sweet smell intensified, now mixed with the coppery tang of blood. It took a step forward, silent except for the drip of that dark substance. The featureless head tilted. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its attention fix on me like a physical weight. A low, wet vibration filled the air, not a sound, but a tremor in my bones, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Panic shattered my paralysis. I threw my shoulder against the apartment door. Once, twice. Wood splintered around the lock. I stumbled out into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. I fumbled for the key, my fingers numb with terror. I jammed it into the lock and turned. Click. I sagged against the wall, gasping, listening. Silence from inside 3B. No scratching, no dripping, just the frantic pounding of my own heart. I'd locked it in. I had to get out. Downstairs. Now. I fled down the back stairs, taking them two at a time. The building felt watchful. The shadows in the corners deeper than they should be. I burst out into the gray afternoon light, blinking. I needed to find Thorne, get my money back, get far away. I ran towards the street corner where I'd seen his car parked the day before. It was gone? Of course it was gone. I ducked into a dingy internet cafe a block over, my hands still trembling. I pulled up the listing for 17B Elmwood Court. It was gone, deleted, vanished from every rental site. A cold certainty settled over me. Thorne hadn't just rented me an apartment. He'd fed me to it. I couldn't stay out. I had nowhere else to go. My savings were almost gone. The cafe closed at 9 p.m. As dusk bled into the bruised purple of twilight, dread became a physical ache in my chest. I stood across the street from Elmwood Court, watching the windows of 3B, dark. All of them. The street lights flickered on, casting long, grasping shadows. I had to go back. Just for tonight. Just to get my things. I'd stay up all night. I'd be gone by dawn. Sal's words haunted me. Nobody stays in 3B, not one night. The back stairs were darker than before. The sweet peach smell was stronger here, clinging to the air. The door to 3B was unlocked. I'd left it locked. I pushed it open slowly. The apartment was cold, colder than outside. The overhead light was dead. The only illumination came from the street lamp outside the window, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. My duffel bag sat exactly where I'd left it on the bed. My unpacked boxes were undisturbed, but the furniture, it was rearranged. The small table and two chairs were pushed against the far wall, stacked precariously. The armchair was shoved into the corner, facing the wall, and the bed had been dragged into the very center of the room, positioned directly under the flickering light fixture. The sheets were pulled tight, smooth, inviting. On the pillow lay the faded blue hair ribbon. My breath fogged in the freezing air. It wants to be seen. It hates the dark. The note, the key. I clutched the cold brass key in my pocket. The key is the only way. Way out or way in? The dripping started again, not from the bathroom this time, from the ceiling above the bed. Plink! A single, fat drop of dark liquid landed on the pristine white sheet. Plink! Another. Plink! It wasn't water. It was thick, viscous. The smell of peaches and blood was overwhelming. From the deepest shadow in the corner where the armchair had been, a sound began. Not dripping, not sighing, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood, slow, patient, waiting. The shadow began to deepen, to coalesce. The tall, elongated shape detached itself from the wall. It didn't walk. It flowed, silent except for the endless tap, tap, tap of its long fingers against its own thigh. It stopped at the foot of the bed, the dark liquid still dripping from its unseen hand onto the sheet. The featureless head turned towards me. The wet vibration filled the room again, stronger now, hungrier. It reached out one long, dripping arm towards the bed, towards the smooth sheets, towards the space beside the pillow where the blue ribbon lay. The command wasn't spoken. It was implanted directly into my mind, cold and absolute, cutting through my terror. Lie down. My legs moved, not of my own will, step by step, drawn towards the bed like iron to a magnet. My body felt heavy, sluggish, responding to a will not my own. The cold intensified, seeping into my bones. The sweet, cloying smell filled my nose, my mouth. The tap, tap, tap grew louder, synchronizing with the frantic pounding of my heart. I reached the side of the bed. The sheets looked impossibly soft. The pillow looked warm. The vibration wasn't just hunger anymore. It was comfort, a promise of rest, an end to the running. The fear that had been a constant drumbeat since I stepped into this building began to soften, to blur at the edges. The cold wasn't unpleasant anymore. It was soothing, like sinking into deep, still water. Lie down. The thought was gentle now, seducing. Rest, be still, be seen. My knees touched the edge of the mattress. My hand brushed the damp sheet. The blue ribbon felt like silk against my fingertips. The shadowy figure stood motionless at the foot of the bed, waiting, patient. Its dripping hand hung loosely at its side. The streetlight outside flickered, casting its long shadow across the room, stretching towards me like a beckoning finger. The tap, tap, tap slowed, softened, became a lullaby. I'm writing this by the dim, flickering light of the dying overhead bulb. It's 3:07 a.m. The sheet beneath me is cold and damp. The sweet smell is everywhere. The shadow sits at the foot of the bed now, a silent sentinel. Its long fingers rest on the mattress near my feet. The dripping has stopped. The tapping has stopped. There is only the soft, wet vibration in the air, a deep, resonant hum that seems to come from the building's bones, from the bed frame itself. It's not frightening anymore. It's familiar, like a heartbeat I'd forgotten I had. Mr. Thorne will be coming soon. He always comes just before dawn to collect the key from under the mat. He won't find it. I won't be leaving, not this time. The apartment doesn't want me to leave. It has what it needs now, a witness, a companion in the dark. It hates being alone. It hates the dark. But I see it now. I see it clearly in the shadows, and in return, it lets me rest. The bed is so very comfortable. The cold is so very deep. The vibration is so very quiet. I understand now why no one stays longer than one night. They all ran, before it could show them the comfort of the stillness, before it could show them the peace of being seen. The light is flickering faster, dying. Soon the street lamp outside will go out too. The true dark will come, and in the dark It will lean closer. Its featureless face will hover near mine. It will share its silence, its stillness, its endless, hungry watch. I won't mind. I won't be afraid. I won't be alone. The key is cold in my hand where I clutch it against my chest. I don't need it anymore. There are no doors left to unlock, no doors left to lock. I close my eyes. The vibration deepens, filling my skull, my bones, my blood. It's not a sound. It's the sound of the building breathing, the sound of the dark. Finally satisfied, the last flicker of light dies. The shadows rush in, thick and warm as grave soil, and in the perfect, silent dark, the thing at the foot of the bed finally stops waiting. Its long, cold fingers brush my ankle. A sigh escapes its smooth, wet stone face. A sigh of relief, a sigh of homecoming. I don't pull away. I sink deeper into the mattress. The bed isn't in the center of the room anymore. The room has shrunk. Or perhaps I have. It doesn't matter. The tapping has started again, softly, rhythmically, on the headboard. Tap, tap, tap. Not a warning, an invitation. I open my mouth, not to scream, to answer. My voice is a dry whisper, lost in the deep, contented hum of the dark. I see you. I breathe into the perfect waiting silence. The fingers tighten gently on my ankle. The vibration swells, warm and heavy as a blanket pulled up to my chin. Dawn won't come for me. Dawn is for those who sleep alone. I close my eyes. The bed is so very warm now. The dark is so very bright. And I will never, ever have to leave. The tapping slows, fades, becomes the steady, comforting beat of my own heart. Finally at rest. The apartment is full. The hunger is quiet. And I am home. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next. I thought the footsteps upstairs were my sister, until I remembered I'm alone. The keys felt unnaturally heavy in my palm when Mrs. Gable pressed them into my hand. "The top floor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting toward the sagging porch roof of the old duplex. "Rent's cheap for a reason, dear. Previous tenant? Well, she left in a hurry, left most everything behind." She wouldn't meet my gaze, focusing instead on smoothing her flowered apron. "Just mind the stairs. They're steep, and the attic door at the top. Keep it locked, always locked." When I asked why, she just shook her head, a brittle smile cracking her lips. Some houses hold on to things. This one holds on to footsteps. She hurried back to her immaculate bungalow next door, leaving me standing alone on the cracked sidewalk with 2 battered suitcases and the echo of her warning hanging in the humid August air. I didn't care about footsteps. I cared about space. After the funeral home released Mom's ashes, cremated the same day she died of the aneurysm that stole her mid-sentence while she was arguing with the insurance company about Dad's old medical bills, I'd slept on my aunt's lumpy couch for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of hushed voices and pitying glances of feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's life. This creaking, peeling Victorian duplex, with its $350 a month top-floor apartment, was my escape, my silence, my grief. The stairs were steep, groaning under my weight, like old bones protesting. The top-floor hallway was narrow, dim, smelling of dust and lemon-scented wax. Mrs. Gable hadn't lied about the previous tenant. The apartment was furnished, a worn corduroy armchair, a thrift store dresser, a small kitchenette with mismatched dishes still in the cupboard. Even clothes hung in the closet, floral dresses, sensible sweaters, a pair of scuffed loafers. The air was thick, still, and carried a faint, sweet scent of lavender and something else, something damp, like earth after rain. I opened windows, letting in the drone of cicadas and the distant hum of the highway. For the first time in weeks, I breathed. That first night, I fell asleep to the sound of my own heartbeat in the unfamiliar quiet. I woke at 1:47 a.m. to the sound of footsteps, not loud, not threatening, just there. Slow, deliberate steps crossing the ceiling above my bed. Thump, scuffle, thump, scuffle. The rhythm was familiar, comforting even. My sister Maya used to pace like that when she couldn't sleep, back and forth across her bedroom floor above mine, her slippers whispering against the rug. I'd lie in bed, listening, until her steps slowed, then stopped, until I heard her soft sigh as she finally sank onto her mattress. Mom would call up, "Maya, you all right, sweetie?" And Maya's muffled voice, thick with exhaustion, "Just thinking, Mama." I smiled into the darkness, tears pricking my eyes. It felt like a visitation, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this echoing house. I pulled a thin blanket tighter and drifted back to sleep, the phantom footsteps, a lullaby. The next night, they came again. Same time, same rhythm. Thump, scuffle, thump, scuffle. I lay still, listening, letting the sound wrap around my loneliness like a worn sweater. But this time, a detail snagged at me. Maya always wore thick wool socks over her slippers when she paced on cold nights. These footsteps were barefoot, soft, almost liquid. The third night, I couldn't sleep. The grief was a physical ache behind my ribs. I sat up, hugging my knees, listening to the familiar sounds of the old house settling, the groan of pipes, the sigh of floorboards. Then, just after 1:45 a.m., the footsteps began, closer this time, not just crossing the ceiling, stopping right above my bed. I held my breath, a soft tap, 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 followed like knuckles lightly rapping on wood. Maya used to do that too when she wanted my attention without waking Mom. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Maya?" I whispered into the darkness. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then a single soft sigh drifted down through the ceiling vent, a sigh that was unmistakably hers. I broke. Sobs racked my body, silent and desperate. "I miss you," I choked out. "I miss you so much." The sigh came again, closer now, seeming to fill the small room, and beneath it, a voice so faint it might have been the wind in the eaves. "I know." I spent the next day in a daze. Hope warred with disbelief. That night, I placed a glass of water and Maya's favorite strawberry lemonade on the nightstand, a childhood ritual when she'd had bad dreams. "For you?" I whispered before bed. When I woke, the glass was empty. The lemonade glass sat beside it, sticky with residue. My rational mind screamed coincidence, a draft, a mouse. But my heart knew Maya was here, with me. Then the footsteps changed. It started subtly. The rhythm grew uneven. Thump, thud, scuffle, thud. Heavier, less hesitant. One night, I woke to the sound of something being dragged across the floor above, a slow, grating scrape that ended with a muffled thump against the wall. The next night, the tapping returned, but harder, insistent. Rap, rap, rap. Right over my head, I called out, "Maya, what is it? What do you need?" Only silence answered. The lavender scent in the air turned cloying, thick with the damp earth smell I'd noticed on move-in day. And the room grew cold. Not just cool, biting cold that made my breath fog in the moonlight. I found the first message on the bathroom mirror the next morning, written in condensation, as if traced by fingertip. Let me in. I scrubbed it away with trembling hands, telling myself it was just humidity. But that night, the footsteps were frantic. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. They circled the room above, faster and faster, shaking dust from the ceiling. The cold intensified, frosting the window pane. The lavender smell vanished, replaced by the sharp metallic tang of wet soil, and the voice no longer a sigh, a whisper layered with the sound of roots tearing through damp earth. Open the door, please, it's dark, so dark. Panic cut through my grief. This wasn't Maya. Maya wouldn't terrify me. Maya wouldn't make the temperature drop 20 degrees. I locked my bedroom door. I pushed the heavy armchair against it. I slept with the lights on. The footsteps stopped, but the cold remained, and the smell of earth clung to my sheets. Mrs. Gable found me the next afternoon sitting on the porch steps, shivering in the August heat. She took one look at my face and sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "You heard her," she said. Not a question. She led me to her tidy kitchen, poured 2 cups of tea, and told me about Eleanor Vance. "Owned this duplex for 40 years, Mrs. Gable murmured, staring into her cup. "Lived alone upstairs after her husband passed. Quiet woman. Kept to herself. Then 2 years ago, her sister moved in. Clara. Sickly thing. Cancer. Eleanor nursed her day and night. They were close. Like you and your sister, I'd wager." She paused, her knuckles white on the mug. "Clara died upstairs, in that very apartment. Peacefully, they said, in her sleep. But Eleanor, she couldn't let go. Started hearing things. Footsteps. Whispers. Said Clara was cold. Said she wanted to come home." Mrs. Gable's eyes met mine, sharp and sad. "Eleanor boarded up the attic door, nailed it shut, put salt lines on the floors, said the footsteps weren't Clara's, said something had followed Clara back from wherever she went, something that wore her voice, that hungered for the warmth of the living. I remembered the empty lemonade glass, the condensation on the mirror. Let me in. Eleanor tried to leave," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice dropping. "Packed her bags one night. But when I checked on her the next morning, she was sitting in that armchair of yours, cold as ice, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The police said heart failure, stress. But I knew." She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her skin was papery thin, ice cold. "The footsteps didn't stop after she died. They got louder, angrier. The last tenant, a young man, he lasted 3 weeks, broke his lease. Said the thing upstairs screamed his name in his dead mother's voice." She squeezed my hand. "Eleanor's sister, Clara. She wasn't just sick when she died. She was lonely. And loneliness, it's a door some things know how to open." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, a kitchen knife in my lap, every lamp blazing. 1:45 a.m. came and went. Silence. Then, just before 2 hot a.m., the footsteps began. Not upstairs. Thump, scuffle, thump, scuffle. Coming down the stairs. My blood turned to ice. I was on the top floor. There was nowhere above me. The footsteps stopped outside my apartment door. The doorknob rattled gently. Click, click, click. I held my breath. The rattling stopped. Then a soft, familiar sigh seeped under the door. "Open up, little sparrow. It's just me." Maya's voice. Exactly as I remembered it. Warm, tired, loving. The voice that sang me to sleep when thunderstorms rattled our childhood windows. Tears streamed down my face. The knife trembled in my hand. "Maya," I whispered, "the lock's cold." The voice sighed. "My hands are cold. Let me warm them by you." I almost did it. I almost stood up, almost turned the deadbolt. The grief was a physical pull, a hook in my chest, dragging me toward the door. But Mrs. Gable's words echoed, something that wore her voice. I pressed my back against the door, the cold wood biting through my shirt. "You're not her," I choked out. "Maya wouldn't make this room freeze. Maya wouldn't smell like dirt." Silence. Then the voice changed. The warmth bled away, replaced by a dry, rasping vibration that seemed to come from the floorboards themselves. "She is cold. So cold. The dirt is cold. Let me in. I will warm her. I will warm you both." The doorknob rattled violently. The armchair scraped against the floor, dragged backward by an invisible force. Frost spread across the doorframe like black veins. The lavender scent vanished, swallowed by the reek of wet clay and decay. I ran, not to the front door. The lock was old, flimsy. I ran to the fire escape window, fumbling with the latch, my fingers numb with cold. The doorknob shattered, splinters flew. The door swung inward, revealing only darkness and the smell of earth, thick, suffocating. Footsteps crossed the threshold, slow, deliberate. Thump, scuffle, thump, scuffle. Stopping inches from where I crouched by the window, I squeezed my eyes shut, the knife raised. "Maya," I sobbed, "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry I let you feel alone." The cold lessened, just a fraction. The earthy smell receded, replaced by the faintest hint of lavender, and Maya's voice, clear and strong, filled the space, not from the darkness, but from the deepest part of my own memory. "You were always there, little sparrow. Always." I opened my eyes. The apartment was empty. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting the floor silver. The door hung open on broken hinges. The armchair sat neatly in the corner. The air was warm. Still. On the floor, where the footsteps had stopped, lay a single object. Maya's old hairbrush, the one with the chipped turquoise handle she'd carried since college. I'd buried it with her. I picked it up. It was warm. I didn't lock the door that night. I left it open. The footsteps never returned, but sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the grief feels like a stone in my chest, I sit by the window with Maya's brush in my hand. The air grows still. The scent of lavender drifts on a breeze that shouldn't be there, and if I listen very closely, beneath the hum of the city, I hear it. Not footsteps, a soft, contented sigh, the sound of a sister finally at peace, not in the attic, not in the dirt, but right here, in the space between heartbeats, in the warmth I carry. Mrs. Gable replaced the broken door. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a small potted lavender plant one morning. "For the windowsill," she said. "Keeps the bad dreams away." She was wrong. The dreams still come. But now, in the deepest dark, when the loneliness threatens to swallow me whole, I place my palm flat on the warm wood of the floorboards, and I wait, not for footsteps, for the sigh. I'm not alone, and neither is she. The house knows it now. It holds its breath. And in that silence, we remember. Some doors aren't meant to be locked. Some voices aren't meant to be silenced. Some love is too strong for even the deepest dark to keep buried. The footsteps were never hers, but the sigh, that's all her. And it's enough. And with that, this story fades into the dark. Let's quietly step into the next one. I took a job as a night watchman at a remote hospice. The patients haven't moved in years, but their shadows do. The advertisement was taped to the window of a laundromat in a town that barely registered on Google Maps. It was a single sheet of yellowed paper, curled at the edges, written in the frantic, jagged loops of an old typewriter. Night caretaker, needed, St. Jude's Palliative Care Center. No medical experience required. $500 per night. Cash. $500 a night for a college dropout drowning in student loans and driving a Honda Civic that sounded like it was gargling gravel. That kind of money wasn't just appealing. It was a lifeline. I didn't question why the pay was so high for a job that required zero skills. I didn't question why a hospice was hiring via a laundromat flyer. Desperation has a way of putting blinders on a man. I called the number. A woman answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping over concrete. She didn't ask for my name, my references, or my background. She just asked if I could stay awake from sundown to sunup. When I said yes, she gave me an address and told me to be there by 8 p.m. sharp. The drive took 2 hours. I left the interstate and turned onto a state highway, then a county road, and finally a gravel track that wound its way up into the dense, suffocating pine forests of the Cascades. The trees were tall here, ancient things that blotted out the twilight, creating a tunnel of shadows that seemed to swallow my headlights. The deeper I drove, the heavier the air felt. My ears popped. The radio static grew louder until it drowned out the music, forcing me to drive in silence. St. Jude's wasn't a hospital. It was a manor house, a Victorian monstrosity of dark wood and stone perched on a cliff edge overlooking a valley of black mist. It had turrets and gables and windows that looked like heavy-lidded eyes. The ivy climbing the walls was dead, a brown, skeletal web choking the masonry. I parked my car in a gravel circle. The engine sputtered and died before I even turned the key. Silence rushed in to fill the void, a heavy ringing silence that felt pressurized. The front door opened before I reached the steps. A woman stood there. She was impossibly tall, wearing a stiff gray nurse's uniform that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. Her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it pulled the skin of her face taut, giving her a permanent, skull-like grin. "You're late," she said. Her lips didn't seem to move enough to form the words. "It's 7:58, I said, checking my watch. "Time flows differently at altitude," she replied cryptically. She stepped aside. "Come in. Do not let the heat out." I stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the smell of a hospital, no antiseptic or bleach. It smelled of lavender, heavy and cloying, masking something underneath. Something sweet and rotten, like spoiled meat, buried under a bouquet of flowers. The air was stiflingly hot. The radiator pipes running along the walls hissed and clanked rhythmically. "I am Matron Halloway," she said, locking the heavy oak door behind me. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot. "You are here to watch the third floor, the west wing." "Just the third floor?" I asked. "The other floors are dormant," she said. She didn't elaborate. She handed me a heavy iron ring with 3 keys. "The brass key opens a stairwell. The silver key opens a supply closet. The black key—" "You must never use the black key. It is for the basement. There is nothing in the basement that concerns you. Do you understand?" "Yes," I lied. I was already curious. "Your duties are simple," she continued, leading me up a grand staircase where the carpet was worn threadbare in a distinct path up the center. "Walk the hall, check the doors, ensure the residents remain in their beds. If the boiler acts up, bleed the radiator in the hallway, not the rooms. And most importantly," she stopped on the landing, turning to face me. Her eyes were a milky pale blue. "Do not speak to them. No matter what you hear, no matter what they say, do not engage." "They talk?" I asked. "I thought this was palliative care. End of life." "They dream," she whispered, "and their dreams are contagious." We reached the 3rd floor. It was a long, narrow corridor lined with dark wood paneling. The floor was covered in a runner rug with a complex, dizzying geometric pattern. There were 12 doors, 6 on each side. "I will return at dawn," Matron Halloway said. "There is a thermos of coffee in the nurse's station. Do not sleep. If you sleep, you may not wake up as yourself." With that cheerful piece of advice, she turned and descended the stairs. I listened to her footsteps fade, click, 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 until the heavy door at the bottom of the stairwell slammed shut. I was alone. I went to the nurse's station, a small alcove halfway down the hall. It was dusty. The computer was an ancient CRT monitor that hummed with a high-pitched whine. On the desk was a ledger. I opened it. It was a logbook. The names of the patients were written in elegant script. Room 301, Mr. Blackwood. Room 302, Mrs. Gable. Room 303, the twins. Room 304, unknown. Unknown? How could a patient be unknown? I decided to do my first round. I needed to see what I was dealing with. I walked to room 301. The door was heavy oak, no window. I turned the handle slowly and peered inside. The room was lit only by the moonlight filtering through the heavy velvet drapes. In the center was a hospital bed. Lying in it was a figure. Mr. Blackwood was ancient. His skin was like parchment paper stretched over a bundle of twigs. He was impossibly thin. His mouth was open, a black cavern in his face. He wasn't connected to any machines, no heart monitor, no IV drip. He was perfectly still. I watched his chest. It didn't rise. It didn't fall. I stepped closer. "Mr. Blackwood?" I whispered, breaking the rule immediately. Nothing. I leaned in to check for breath. The air around him was freezing cold despite the stifling heat of the hallway. Then I saw his eyes. They were open, staring at the ceiling. But they weren't human eyes. They were flat, matte black, like a shark's, and they were dry. I backed out of the room and shut the door. My heart was hammering. He looked dead. He looked like he had been dead for weeks. I checked room 302. Mrs. Gable. Same thing. Withered, motionless, no machines, staring at the ceiling with those dead black eyes. I went through every room. 12 rooms, 12 corpses, or things that looked like corpses. None of them breathed. None of them moved. I went back to the nurse's station and sat down. My hands were shaking. I poured a cup of coffee from the thermos. It was lukewarm and tasted bitter like ash. I looked at the time. 10:15 p.m., 8 hours to go. "It's just a storage facility," I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize it. "They're dead, and the matron is just keeping them here until what? Funerals?" At 11 p.m., the sounds started. It began as a scratching noise, like rats in the walls. I tried to ignore it. Old houses have rats. But then the scratching changed. It became rhythmic. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from the floorboards, directly beneath my feet. I moved my chair back. The scratching followed me. Then a thud, loud and wet, coming from room 306. I grabbed a heavy flashlight I'd brought from my car. I walked down the hall to room 306. The nameplate said, Captain Miller. I stood outside the door. Silence. Then another thud, like a side of beef being dropped on the floor. I threw the door open and shone the light inside. Captain Miller was in his bed. He hadn't moved. He was still staring at the ceiling with those shark eyes. But the bed had moved. When I checked earlier, the bed was in the center of the room. Now it was pushed up against the far wall under the window. I scanned the floor. There were drag marks in the dust. But they didn't lead to the bed. They led from the bed to the door, and then back again, as if he had gotten up, walked to the door to listen to me, and then scrambled back into bed when I approached. "I know you're awake," I said, my voice trembling. The corpse of Captain Miller didn't blink, but slowly the corners of his mouth twitched, a dry crackling sound like tearing paper. He smiled. It was a wide, impossible smile that revealed gums black with rot. I slammed the door and backed away. I locked it from the outside, using the master key on the ring. I retreated to the nurse's station. I pulled the ledger toward me. I needed to know who these people were. I flipped back through the pages. The dates went back. November 2023, October 2023, September 1994, August 1952, July 1921. I stopped. The handwriting was the same names. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Gable, Captain Miller. They had been checked in decades ago. These people weren't dying. They were persisting. At midnight, the temperature dropped. The radiator pipes groaned and fell silent. The oppressive heat vanished, replaced by a bone-deep chill that made my breath fog in the air, and the shadows detached. I was watching the hallway. The only light came from the small lamp on my desk. It cast long shadows from the doorframes across the patterned rug. I watched as the shadow of room 304's doorframe stretched. It grew longer. It bent in the middle, forming a knee, then a torso, then a head. The shadow pulled itself free from the wood and stood up in the middle of the hallway. It was two-dimensional, a silhouette cut from the darkness, but it had presence. It blocked the view of the far end of the hall, then another shadow detached from room 308, and another from 310. They stood in the hallway, silent, faceless, turning their flat heads toward me. I froze. I remembered the matron's rule, do not speak to them. The shadow from room 304 began to glide toward me. It didn't walk. It slid across the floor like an oil slick. I scrambled backward, knocking over the coffee thermos. The brown liquid splashed onto the rug. The shadow paused at the spill. It crouched down. I watched in horror as it dipped a shadowy hand into the coffee. It brought the hand to where a mouth should be. It made a sound, a slurping, sucking sound. Then it spoke. "Bitter," the shadow whispered. The voice didn't come from the shadow itself. It came from the walls, vibrating the wood paneling. "We prefer sweet. We prefer vital." "What are you?" I whispered. "We are the guests," the shadow said. "The shells in the beds. They are just the heavy coats we wear during the day. The day is so bright. It burns. But the night is ours." It stood up and started moving toward me again. I ran. I grabbed the keys and sprinted for the stairwell. I shoved the brass key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. "Wrong key," the shadow whispered. It was right behind me now. I could feel the cold radiating off it. I fumbled with the ring. I tried the silver key. It didn't fit. The shadow's hand reached out. It touched my shoulder. It didn't feel like a hand, it felt like vacuum. It felt like the space where my shoulder existed was suddenly being deleted. Numbness spread down my arm instantly. I screamed and dropped the keys. "The black key," the shadow hissed. "Go down. The matron is waiting." I kicked the keys away and threw my shoulder against the door. It was solid oak. It didn't budge. The shadows were circling me now. 6 of them. They were featureless, but I could feel their hunger. "Why me?" I yelled. "Why am I here?" "The matron needs a new coat," the shadow of Captain Miller said. "Hers is wearing thin. Look." The shadow pointed to the nurse's station. I looked. Standing there was Matron Halloway. But she wasn't wearing her skin correctly. Her face was sagging, drooping off the bone like melting wax. One eye had slid down to her cheek. Her jaw was hanging loose. Underneath the sliding skin, I saw something dark and shifting, something made of smoke and teeth. "Shift change," the matron's voice gurgled. I looked at the window at the end of the hall. It was a straight drop to the jagged rocks of the valley below. But it was better than this. I ran. I dodged through the circle of shadows. They swiped at me, their touches sending bolts of freezing numbness through my body. My left leg went dead, but I kept hopping. I threw myself at the window. I expected the glass to shatter. It didn't. I bounced off. The glass was soft. It felt like rubber. It bent outward, catching me like a net, and then snapped back, throwing me onto the rug. I looked up at the window. The glass rippled. It wasn't glass. It was a membrane. A clear biological film stretched over the frame. The house wasn't a house. I looked at the walls. The wood paneling was pulsing, breathing. The geometric pattern on the rug was writhing, shifting like snakes. "You are inside," the matron gurgled, shambling toward me. She reached up and grabbed her own hair. She pulled. With a wet, tearing sound, she peeled her face off. Underneath, there was no skull, just a swirling vortex of black shadow. "We are all inside," she said. I crawled backward. My hand hit the keys I had dropped. The black key, the one she said never to use. The basement. If the stairwell door wouldn't open, maybe the supply closet would. No, that was a dead end. I looked at the floor. In the center of the rug, there was a hatch. I hadn't seen it before because the rug covered it, but the rug had pulled back, revealing a handle. It had a black keyhole. The shadows were closing in. The matron was looming over me, the darkness inside her reaching out like tendrils. I jammed the black key into the floor hatch. It turned with a fluid, organic click. I pulled the hatch open. I expected a ladder. I expected stairs. I saw a throat, a fleshy, red, pulsating tunnel going straight down into the dark. The walls of the tunnel were lined with teeth, rows and rows of molars the size of cinder blocks. "The basement," the matron whispered. "The stomach." I looked at the shadows. I looked at the teeth. "Jump," the shadows whispered. "Join the digestion. Become a coat." I didn't jump. I scrambled. I rolled to the side just as the matron lunged. She fell into the hole. She didn't scream. She laughed, a hollow, echoing laugh as she tumbled down into the gullet of the house. The house screamed. The walls shook. The floor buckled. The residents in the rooms began to wail, a high, piercing shriek that shattered the light bulbs. The shadows flickered and vanished. The illusion was breaking. I stood up on my numb leg. The stairwell door had swung open. The lock had shattered. I ran. I tumbled down the stairs, tripping, falling, breaking my nose on the banister. I didn't stop. I ran past the second floor, past the first floor. The foyer was changing. The wallpaper was peeling back to reveal raw muscle. The front door was teeth. I grabbed a heavy iron coat rack from the corner and smashed it into the front window. This glass was real. It shattered. I dove through the jagged hole, cutting my arms and face, and landed in the gravel driveway. I scrambled to my car. It started on the first try. I drove. I didn't look back. I drove down the mountain at 80 miles an hour, risking death on every curve. I didn't stop until I reached the next state. That was a week ago. I'm in a motel now. I keep the lights on. I keep the TV on, but I can't escape it. I looked in the mirror this morning. There is a loose patch of skin on my cheek, just a small spot. But when I touch it, I can't feel it, and underneath, I can feel something moving. I think the matron was right. I think I let the heat out, and now I'm getting cold. I just heard a car pull up outside the motel room. It sounds like an old engine. And now there is a knock at the door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Thump, 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 and a voice. "You forgot your paycheck, Mr. Evans." It's the matron's voice. And then the sound of a key sliding into the lock. A black key. I'm going to the window. I'm going to run. But the window, the glass looks soft. It looks like it's breathing.